Hey everyone, tonight we are traveling back to a place that history often forgets to mention. A vast, sun-baked corridor where an empire managed to hold on to power for a millennium longer than the Romans, longer than the Ottomans, and certainly longer than my last attempt at a New Year's resolution. We are heading to the shores of Lake Chad, but not as you see it on a map today. We're going back to when it was an inland sea, a life-giving turquoise eye staring up from the center of the African continent. We're talking about the Kanem-Bornu Empire, a civilization that mastered the art of cavalry warfare in the sand and built a dynasty that just refused to quit. Now, imagine standing in the middle of the Sahel in the 8th century. It's hot. Not, I forgot to turn the AC on hot, but the air itself is trying to mummify you hot. You probably wouldn't survive this for more than 48 hours without a local guide. Mostly because you'd likely try to pet a hippopotamus or drink from a pool of water that's 90% parasite. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the global roll call. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on the edge of the world, or at least, that's what it feels like. The ground beneath your sandals is a mixture of scorched earth and fine powdery sand that seems to work its way into the very fabric of your skin. To your north lies the Sahara, a literal ocean of silica, a barrier so formidable that for centuries, people on either side assumed nothing existed beyond it but demons and death. But here, where you're standing, the desert relents. It gives way to the Sahel, the shore of the desert, a transitional zone of scrub brush, acacia trees, and hardy grasses that shimmer in the heat haze. You shield your eyes against the glare. The sun here is a physical weight, pressing down on your shoulders, bleaching the color out of everything until the world looks like an overexposed photograph. But then you see the water. This is the Mega Chad. Okay, historians don't call it that affectionately, but they do acknowledge that Lake Chad was once gargantuan, dwarfing its modern footprint. In the 8th century, it is still a massive body of water, a sprawling network of lagoons, marshes, and open water that acts as the beating heart of north-central Africa. It is the only reason you aren't dead yet. The air here is thick with humidity, a jarring contrast to the dry oven of the desert just a few miles north. You can hear the cacophony of life, millions of waterfowl screaming into the sky, the splash of massive Nile perch, and the low, rumbling grunt of crocodiles sliding off mudbanks. You start walking along the re-choked banks. You aren't alone. You notice tracks in the mud, not just animals, but people. This region is a magnet. In a continent defined by its harsh climatic extremes, Lake Chad is the ultimate VIP lounge. Everyone wants to be here. You see small settlements of straw and mud huddled near the water's edge. But the people who really run this show aren't the ones sitting still. You hear them before you see them. A low thrumming of hooves. It's not the thunderous charge of heavy cavalry, not yet, anyway, but the steady, rhythmic trot of a nomadic patrol. Out of the dust, a group of riders appears. These are the Zag. They are tall, wrapped in indigo and white robes that flutter in the hot wind, their faces obscured against the sand. They look at you with the casual indifference of apex predators. The Zagawa are the masters of this terrain. They are nomads, drifting between the desert and the lake, trading, raiding, and herding. And speaking of herding, look at the animals they are driving toward the water. You might expect camels, and there are a few, but the real stars of the show are the cattle. These aren't your standard dairy cows. These are curry cattle, a breed that looks like it was designed by a fantasy illustrator who had a bit too much mead. They have massive bulbous horns that look swollen, almost like balloons, and that's exactly what they are. Those giant, honeycombed horns act as flotation devices. You watch, stunned, as the Zagawa drive the herd directly into the deep water. The cows don't just wade, they swim, their heads bobbing above the surface, supported by their built-in life preservers, grazing on the floating vegetation that other animals can't reach. It's a brilliant evolutionary hack, and it's the economic engine of these people. You follow the riders from a safe distance, trudging through the papyrus reeds. You're witnessing the early coalescence of a superpower. Though it looks chaotic right now, the Zagawa aren't a single, unified nation yet. They are a loose confederation of clans, all vying for the best grazing spots and the most lucrative trade connections. And this brings us to a bit of a scholarly argument, because historians love a good brawl over origins. As you watch these nomads set up a temporary camp, you might wonder where they came from. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that the Zaghawa were Berber invaders from the north, light-skinned conquerors who came down and imposed their will on the locals. This was part of the Hamitic hypothesis, a rather outdated and frankly racist 19th century idea that basically said Africans couldn't have built cool stuff, so outsiders must have done it. However, as you sit by their fire trying to ignore the fact that they are roasting something that looks suspiciously like a giant ratu, realize the reality is much more local. Modern archaeology and linguistics suggest these people are indigenous to the corridor between the Nile and the lake. They are Saharans who were pushed south as the desert dried up over millennia. They didn't invade, they condensed. They are the survivors of a climate apocalypse that turned green savannas into the Sahara Desert, forcing everyone into this narrow strip of habitable land. The sun begins to set, and the sky turns a violent shade of purple. The temperature drops, not to a comfortable level, but from inferno to pizza oven. The mosquitoes come out in legions. You swat at your neck, realizing that this biodiversity comes with a price. This is the crucible. The environment here demands toughness. You can see it in the way the Zaghawa handle their animals, with a mix of reverence and ruthlessness. They are organizing. You notice that some men seem to have more authority than others. They aren't just deciding where to graze, they are deciding who gets to trade with the merchants. Coming down from the north, trade is the secret sauce here. You spot a small caravan arriving from the Dusk Berber merchants from the Fezzan region of modern-day Libya. They've crossed the Sea of Sand to get here. They are unloading slabs of salt and bolts of cloth. In exchange, the Zaghawa are offering ivory, ostrich feathers, and, tragically, captives people seized from neighboring tribes to be sold north. It's a grim business, but it's the economic bedrock that is about to turn these loose clans into a dynasty. The atmosphere in the camp is tense, but disciplined. You get the sense that the era of pure nomadism is ending. There is too much wealth passing through this bottleneck to just wander aimlessly anymore. Someone needs to control the flow. Someone needs to tax the salt and guard the ivory. As the moon rises, reflecting off the dark, still waters of Lake Chad, you see a gathering of clan elders. They are arguing, gesturing at the stars and the herds. They are realizing that if they stop fighting each other and start fighting everyone else, they could own this entire shoreline. You curl up on a woven mat, trying to find a comfortable spot on the hard earth, listening to the low murmur of a language that will one day command an empire. You are sleeping at ground zero of state formation. The Zaghawa are about to do something audacious. They are going to stop running. They are going to plant a flagor, a spear in the mud, and say, "This is ours." But to do that, they need a king. And not just any king, but a figure so shrouded in myth that 1,000 years later, we still woe and be entirely sure if he was a man or a story told to scare children into behaving. You rub the sleep from your eyes and swat away a persistent fly that seems determined to explore your nasal cavity. The sun is up and the camp has transformed. Last night felt like a gathering of cowboys. This morning feels like the birth of a government. And let's be honest, governments are usually less fun than cowboys, but they tend to leave bigger ruins. You watch as the chaos of the herds is replaced by a strange, organized stillness. The clan elders you saw arguing last night have come to a decision. They aren't just going to be a confederation of buddies anymore, they are crowning a king. This is the dawn of the Dugwa dynasty. Now, do UNT worry if that name does UNT ring a bell from your high school history class most textbooks? Skip right over this part to get to the guys with the muskets later on. But the Dugwa are the OGs. They're the ones who looked at this sprawling, mosquito-infested lake and said, "We can tax this." You see a figure emerging from the largest tent. The atmosphere shifts instantly. The chatter dies down. Even the cattle seem to stop chewing. This is the Mai the King, but he doesn't look like a European monarch with a velvet cape and a scepter. He looks terrifyingly divine. In this early animist period of Kanem, the king isn't just a political leader. He is a god on earth. He is the physical embodiment of the state's vitality. If he gets a cold, the crops die. If he trips, an earthquake happens. It's a hyper-sure job. You notice something odd though. The people around him, his courtiers, his guards, they avert their eyes. No one looks him directly in the face. This is your first introduction to the intense ritual seclusion of the Kanem kings. You watch as he is seated on a raised platform, shielded by a screen. Here is a quirky little reality of life in the Dugwa court. Nobody is allowed to see the king eat. It is a capital offense. The belief is that if you see the king performing a mortal biological function, like chewing or swallowing, it breaks the illusion of his divinity. Imagine the stress of that. You're the most powerful man in the Sahara, but every time you want a snack, you have to hide in a closet like a raccoon. If you sneeze during a public audience, your executioner probably starts sweating nervously, wondering who to blame. As you walk through the expanding settlement, which historians believe might be the early version of their first capital, you realize that this city is really just a permanent military camp. There are no stone palaces yet. It's a city of reed mats, leather tents, and wooden stockades. But the power projection is real. You see patrols riding out, not to herd cattle, but to demand tribute. They are targeting the local agriculturalists, the people who actually farm the land. This is the classic protection racket model of state formation. The Zagawa riders say, "Nice sorghum field you have there. Be a shame if a herd of 500 cows trampled it. Pay us in grain, and we'll make sure nobody else tramples it either." This brings us to one of the most fascinating interactions in African history. You see, the Zagawa aren't the only ones here. You spot some incredibly tall, robust figures moving through the market, looking distinct from the leaner nomads. These are the Sao. Now, historians still argue furiously about who the Sao actually were. Local oral tradition insists they were a race of literal giant superhumans who could block rivers with their hands and roast elephants for dinner. Archaeological digs in the region have found massive clay pots and bronze ornaments that suggest a sophisticated, settled civilization that predated the Kanem nomads. The Zagawa are currently in the process of conquering, assimilating, and partially erasing these people. It's a slow-motion collision of cultures. The Zagawa have the horses and the mobility, but the Sao have the numbers and the walled towns. You watch a diplomatic exchange that looks more like a standoff. A Zagawa commander is negotiating with a Sao elder. The Sao elder towers over him, but the Zagawa commander has his hand on the hilt of an iron sword. The Dugwa dynasty is asserting dominance, but it's fragile. They are ruling over a population that is culturally different from them, and they are doing it through sheer military intimidation and spiritual fear. That spiritual fear is centered on an object you might catch a glimpse of if you re-lucky, and if you don't mind risking a curse. It's being carried by a special retinue of priests. It's called the Mune. The Mune is the Ark of the Covenant for the Kanem-Bornu people, but darker. It's a sacred object, the contents of which are a supreme secret. Some legends say it contains the dried heart of the first hero. Others say it holds ancient talismans from the east. The Dugwa kings base their entire authority on possessing this object. As long as the Mune is sealed and safe, the empire stands. It's the ultimate do-not-touch item in the Museum of History. You follow the procession as the king moves to a new location. The Dugwa court is semi-nomadic. They are a capital on wheels, or rather, on hooves. This mobility is their strength. If a drought hits one area, the entire government just packs up and moves to a wetter zip code. It makes them impossible to conquer. How do you siege a capital city that isn't there when you arrive? But there is a problem. You can feel it in the air as you wander through the dusty lanes of the camp. The Dugwa are powerful locally, but they are isolated. They are animists in a world that is rapidly glassing. To the north, across the Great Sand Sea, the merchants are Muslim. To the east, the Nile Valley is Muslim or Christian. The Dugwa are stuck in a spiritual cul-de-sac. You see a group of Berber traders, the same ones from last night, looking a bit uncomfortable. They are doing business, sure, but they look down on the Zagawa. They call them pagans and kafir. They charge them higher prices. They don't offer them the best deals or the latest intelligence from the Mediterranean. You watch the king's advisors whispering. They are smart men. They realize that being a terrifying divine god king is great for scaring the local farmers, but it's bad for international relations. They are hitting a glass ceiling. To become a true empire, to dominate the trans-Saharan trade routes, rather than just participating in them, they need an upgrade. They need to join the club. As the sun beats down on your head, you realize the Dugwa are about to make a choice that will change the trajectory of the continent. They are about to trade their divine isolation for a membership card to the medieval world's biggest economic bloc. The camp begins to settle for the midday heat. The noise of the animals dies down. You find a spot of shade under a thorny acacia tree, watching the horizon. The dust is settling, but the political landscape is about to shift tectonically. The Dugwa have built the foundation. They have the land, the cows, and the scary secret box. Now, they need a god that the rest of the world recognizes. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the wind whistle through the thorns. When you open them, the vibe is going to be very different. The animist chants are going to be replaced by the call to prayer, and the divine king is going to have to learn some Arabic. You are standing in the same dusty courtyard, but the soundscape has shifted entirely. Gone is the exclusive rhythm of the heavy ceremonial drums that used to signal every breath the king took. Instead, a new sound cuts through the dry heat of the afternoon, a human voice. High and clear, reciting the Adhanda call to prayer. It is the late 11th century, and you are witnessing the ultimate corporate rebranding strategy. The ruling elite of Kanem have decided to convert to Islam. Now, if you're cynical and, since you're listening to this, I assume you have a healthy dose of skepticism, you might think this was purely a spiritual awakening, and maybe, for some, it was. But from where you're standing, watching the merchants high-five each other near the camel pens, this looks a lot like a business merger. In the medieval world, Islam wasn't just a religion. It was the World Trade Organization, the swift banking system, and the internet all rolled into one. Before this moment, the Kanem rulers were powerful, sure, but they were outsiders. They were the scary pagans down south who had good ivory but couldn't be trusted with a line of credit. By converting, they are unlocking the premium features of the trans-Saharan economy. You watch as a scribe sits in the shade, dipping a reed pen into ink. This is a revolutionary technology. Before this, agreements were sworn on spears or blood. Now, they are written down in Arabic. You can see the relief on the faces of the foreign traders. They now have a legal framework. They understand. If a deal goes south, they can appeal to Sharia law rather than wondering if the local river god is angry at them. But don't think for a second that this transition is smooth. You walk into the royal enclosure and the tension is thick enough to choke a goat. You are looking at a classic case of what historians call syncretism, which is a fancy word for hedging your bets. The Mitha king is performing his daily prayers. He bows toward Mecca, reciting the verses. But look closely at what he's wearing. Beneath the fine imported cotton robes suitable for a Muslim sultan, he is still wearing the traditional amulets of his ancestors. He is praying to Allah, but he is terrified of offending the spirits of the lake. Here is the quirky, slightly awkward reality of this period. The divine king restriction we talked about earlier. It doesn't vanish. In fact, it gets weirder. Islam preaches equality before God, but the Kanem customs preach that the king is a godlike being who must never be seen. So, you have this bizarre spectacle where the king attends. Friday communal prayers a requirement of the new faith, but he does so inside a caged-off wooden box or behind a heavy curtain. The imam leads the prayer, and the congregation follows, all while the most powerful man in the room is hiding in a glorified birdcage in the corner to maintain his mystique. You notice the common people standing on the periphery, looking confused. This is a top-down revolution. The farmers, the fishermen, the guys cleaning the stables, they haven't converted. To them, this new religion is just another strange habit of the rich, like drinking expensive tea or wearing uncomfortable shoes. Historians still argue about how deep this conversion actually went in the early days. Was it just a passport conversion to get better trade deals, or did these early kings truly believe? Walking through the palace, you get the sense it's a bit of both. You hear the king discussing theology with a scholar from Fezzan, and he seems genuinely curious. But 10 minutes later, you hear him ordering a sacrifice that definitely isn't in the Quran to ensure the harvest comes in. This friction is dangerous. You can feel the eyes of the traditionalists, the keepers of the Mun, the old priests burning holes into the backs of the new Islamic scholars. They know their power is being diluted. Every time the king quotes a generic Islamic law, he is ignoring an ancestral custom. But the benefits are undeniable. You follow a group of royal advisors into a mud brick room that serves as the new chancery. They are reading a letter from a governor in North Africa. For the first time, Kanem is part of the global conversation. They aren't just those nomads with the cows anymore. They are a recognized sultanate. You see a map on the tabula crude, beautiful thing, and there, for the first time, is the name of this kingdom, written in ink. Fixed in the geography of the known world, this pivot does something else, too. It changes the architecture of power. You notice that the king is starting to surround himself not just with clan relatives, but with slaves and eunuchs who are loyal only to him. Islam provides a legal structure for a more centralized autocratic state, distinct from the loose tribal confederation of the past. The king is realizing that he doesn't have to be just a first among equals with the other clan chiefs. He can be a sultan. As the sun sets, the call to prayer rings out again, mingling with the lowing of the cattle. It's a haunting, dissonant harmony. You are standing at the crossroads of two civilizations. The animist roots go deep into the soil, but the Islamic branches are reaching for the sky. But there is a catch. You can't just adopt a new identity and expect everyone to be cool with it. The old Dagwa dynasty, with its deep ties to the pre-Islamic myths, is becoming obsolete. The software update is too big for the old hardware. You can sense the obsolescence in the air. The current rulers are trying to ride two horses at once, and history tells us that usually ends with someone falling off. A new lineage is waiting in the wings. A family that won't just adopt Islam, but will weaponize it to build a legend so durable it will last for 1,000 years. You watch a young, ambitious figure in the court, a man named Mai. He isn't looking at the mune with reverence. He's looking at it like it's baggage. The pivot is complete, the trade routes are open, the ink is dry. Now, the real Game of Thrones begins. You watch the shadows lengthen across the palace courtyard, and you realize that the tension you felt earlier wasn't just growing pains, it was the prelude to a coup. But this isn't a storm the gates and burn it down kind of revolution. It's quieter, deadlier, and happening right in front of you behind closed curtains. The Dagwa dynasty, for all its ancient prestige, is dying. They are too tied to the old ways, to the animist rituals that embarrass the new, devoutly Muslim merchant class. You see the elites whispering, looking for a leader who doesn't just tolerate the new religion, but embodies it. Enter Mai. You see him standing near the entrance of the royal quarters. He isn't the king yet, but he carries himself like he's already renovated the throne room in his mind. Mai is the first ruler of what will become the Sahara dynasty, and you are witnessing the moment he steps over the threshold of history. Now, historians still argue whether this was a violent takeover or a seamless internal transition. Some scholars believe Mai was just a Dugua, prince who decided to change the family name, like a celebrity trying to distance themselves from an embarrassing reality TV past. Others argue he was an outsider, a usurper representing a rival faction. Watching him now, with his hand resting casually on the hilt of a sword that looks purely decorative, but definitely is unboot, you get the sense that however he got here, he intends to stay. And stay they do. You are looking at the genesis of one of the longest-lasting dynasties in human history. The Safwa will rule for roughly 800 years. Some sources argue nearly 1,000, depending on how you count the Dagwa connection. To put that in perspective, the United States has been a country for about 250 years. The Safwa dynasty saw the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Age of Discovery, and the Industrial Revolution, all while keeping their butts firmly on the same throne. But to hold on to power that long, you need a story. A really good story. And this is where Mai and his descendants pull off one of the greatest PR stunts of the medieval world. You follow a group of scribes into a dimly lit room. They are working under the supervision of a man named Muhammad ibn Mahani. He is a scholar, a teacher, and arguably the most dangerous man in the kingdom because he controls the narrative. He is credited with bringing Islam deep into the royal court, and now he is helping them construct a new identity. They are writing a genealogy. You look over their shoulders at the parchment. They are untracing the king's lineage back to the local Zagawa chiefs or the spirits of Lake Chad anymore. That's too provincial. That's too small town. No, they are drawing a line that goes all the way back to Yemen. Specifically, they are claiming descent from a pre-Islamic Yemeni hero named Saif ibn Diyazan. This is a quirky, fascinating bit of historical fiction. Saif ibn Diyazan was a real Gaia Himyarites king who fought against Ethiopian invaders in the 6th century. He was a legendary figure in Arab folklore. By claiming him as an ancestor, Mai is doing two things. First, he is giving his dynasty a white or light-skinned origin story, which, in the racial hierarchy of medieval Islamic thought, carried a lot of prestige. Second, he is connecting his remote African kingdom directly to the heartland of Islamic history. It's a total fabrication. Genetically and culturally, these guys are as indigenous to the Sahel as the acacia trees outside. But in the pre-DNA era, if you have a scroll that says your great-great Fand was a Yemeni superhero, and you have enough swords to stop anyone from saying Nahu, then guess what? You're Yemeni. You watch as this new narrative takes root. The court poets start singing songs about the Lion of Yemen instead of the Bull of the Lake. It's a brilliant move. It legitimizes them in the eyes of the wider Muslim world. Suddenly, they aren't just converts. They are long-lost cousins returning to the fold. But this legitimacy comes with a price. You see the purging of the old symbols. The traditional animist titles are being softened or hidden. The Mai is still the Mai, but now he is also the Emir al-Mu'minin, the commander of the faithful. Hamay is smart though. He knows you can't just rule with a fake family tree. You need leverage. You watch as he solidifies his relationship with the Islamic scholars, the ulama. He grants them tax exemptions. He gives them land. In exchange, they tell the common people that obeying Humay is the same as obeying God. It's a classic church and state feedback loop. The scholars get funding, the king gets divine job security. As you walk through the capital, you notice the vibe is less warrior camp and more embryonic state. There's a sense of permanence now. The Dugwa were always ready to move. The Saifawa are planning to build UC brickmakers mixing mud and straw, experimenting with more durable structures. They are laying the groundwork for a civilization that intends to be here when the sun burns out. However, there is a reality check waiting just outside the city limits. You take a walk to the edge of the settlement. The desert wind is picking up, whipping sand into your face. The Saifawa might have a fancy new genealogy and a powerful new religion. But they are still living in a hostile environment, surrounded by rivals who you can get the "we are all one happy" Muslim family memo. The local tribes, the ones who didn't get invited to the cool new dynasty party, are restless. You can hear the distant drums of the Balala people to the east. They aren't impressed by the Yemeni story. To them, Hamay is just a power-hungry neighbor who needs to be taken down a peg. Hamay knows this. You see him inspecting the royal guard. He is looking at their equipment with a critical eye. They are armed with spears, bows, and leather shields. It's standard kit for the region. It's fine for raiding cattle or skirmishing with foot soldiers, but Hamay has grander ambitions. He wants to control the trade routes all the way to Fezzan. He wants to dominate the tribes that are currently laughing at his pretensions. He realizes that a new story isn't enough. He needs a new weapon. He needs something that strikes terror into the hearts of his enemies before the battle even starts. You watch as he talks to a trader from the north, gesturing enthusiastically at a drawing in the sand. He isn't asking for more textiles or spices. He is asking for horses. But not the small scrubby ponies of the Sahel. He wants the big ones, the ones that thunder. The Saifawa dynasty has secured its soul through Islam and its identity through a fake Yemeni grandfather. Now, to secure its body, it needs muscle. The era of the infantry skirmish is ending. The era of the cavalry charge is about to begin, and it's going to shake the ground beneath your feet. You are standing on the edge of a flat, sun-bleached plain, squinting against the glare. The heat is doing that wobbly thing in the distance where the horizon looks like it's melting. For the last few centuries, warfare in this region has been a fairly predictable affair. Lots of guys running at each other with spears, maybe some light skirmishing with small ponies, and a whole lot of shouting. It was deadly, sure, but it was ground-based. But today, you feel a vibration in the soles of your feet before you hear anything. It's a low, rhythmic thumping, getting louder and faster than you see them. Cresting the dune are horses, but not the scrappy, hardy ponies indigenous to the Sahel that look like they could survive on a diet of dry grass and resentment. These are different. These are the Ferraris of the medieval world. They are barb horses, imported from North Africa. They are taller, broader-chested, and they carry themselves with an arrogant elegance. This is the dawn of the cavalry revolution in Kanem, and you are witnessing the moment. The military balance of power tips irreversibly in favor of the Saifawa. You watch as a handler struggles to control a massive black stallion. The animal is snorting, tossing its head, its coat gleaming with sweat and oil. These horses are expensive. I mean, bankrupt a small province expensive. To get one of these beasts across the Sahara journey that kills humans and camels a lickrick wires an insane amount of resources. You have to bring extra water, specialized fodder, and dedicated grooms. For every horse that arrives here in Kanem alive, probably 2 or 3 died on the way. So, When you see a ruler like the Mai sitting on top of one of these things, you aren't just seeing a guy on a horse. You are seeing a walking, neighing display of immense wealth. It's like seeing a billionaire landing a private jet on the highway. But it's not just about showing off. You watch a demonstration. A group of archers sets up target straw dummies dressed in the rough cotton of the enemy tribes. The riders line up. These aren't just guys who learned to ride last week. They are part of a new warrior aristocracy. They grip the reins, and on a signal, they charge. The speed is terrifying. A man on foot has absolutely no chance against this. The psychological impact alone is devastating. Imagine you're a foot soldier with a wooden shield, and suddenly half a ton of muscle is hurtling towards you at 30 miles per hour, topped by a man with a spear who can stab you in the face before you can even reach his knees. This is the shock cavalry tactic. The Saifawa aren't using these horses just for transport. They are using them as kinetic energy weapons. They smash into enemy formations, breaking their lines and their morale instantly. However, there is a catch, and since you're here, you notice it immediately. The heat? You watch the horses after the charge. Their flanks are heaving. They are frothing at the mouth. These northern breeds are powerful, but they are delicate flowers compared to the local ponies. They are prone to sleeping sickness, carried by the tsetse fly. This biological barrier is crucial. It means the Kanem Empire can only project this power as far south as the tsetse fly belt allows. If they go too far into the humid woodlands, their multi-million-dollar military investment literally gets bitten by a fly and dies. This ecological limit defines the borders of the empire. You realize that Kanem is destined to be a savanna empire, a grassland superpower. They can dominate the open plains where their horses can run and breathe, but the forests to the south are a no-go zone. You walk through the stables, which are cleaner and better maintained than most of the peasant housing. By the way, and you see the logistics behind this machine. It's not just about buying the horse. It's about the tack. You see artisans crafting intricate saddles. These aren't just pads. They are high-cantle saddles that lock the rider in place. This is a game changer. It allows the rider to absorb the shock of impact without flying over the horse's head like a majestic armor-plated bird. And then there are the stirrups. You see a smith hammering out iron rings. The introduction of the stirrup is one of those small technologies that changed the world. It gives the rider a platform to stand on to leverage their weight for a sword swing or a spear thrust. Without stirrups, you're just a guy balancing on an animal. With stirrups, you are a weapons platform. The Saifawa kings know that maintaining this force requires a constant stream of revenue. And here is the dark feedback loop you can't ignore. You see the cavalry riding out, not to fight a pitched battle, but to raid. They return with captives. These captives are then marched north across the desert to be sold in the slave markets of Tripoli and Cairo. In exchange, the merchants send down more horses. It's a brutal cycle. Horses get you slaves, slaves get you horses. The more horses you have, the more slaves you can capture. This gun slave cycle, or, in this case, horse slave cycle, becomes the engine of Kanem's expansion. It's grim, but from a purely strategic perspective, it's self-sustaining. You stand by the corral as the sun dips lower. The dust is settling, but the implications are huge. The tribes surrounding Kanem-Bornu, the Sao, the Zagawa remnants are in trouble. They are fighting an enemy that moves 3 times faster than them and hits 10 times harder. This military innovation allows the Saifawa to stop just being a local power and start thinking imperially. They can now patrol trade routes hundreds of miles away. They can crush rebellions in distant provinces before the rebels even finish their breakfast. But owning a Ferrari is one thing. Knowing how to drive it in a race is another. The Saifawa have the tools now, but they need a commander who knows how to use them on a massive scale. They need someone who isn't afraid to push these expensive animals to their breaking point. As night falls, you hear the horses whinnying in the dark. It's an eerie sound, a reminder that the stillness of the desert is deceptive. Somewhere in the royal nursery, or perhaps just entering manhood, is a future king who will look at this cavalry force and say, "This is good, but I need more. I need thousands." The stage is set for Mai Dunama II Dibalemi. He's going to take this new toy and turn it into a continental bulldozer. You better get some rest. Tomorrow, we ride with an army that is going to rewrite the map of Africa. You wake up to the sound of thunder, but the sky is perfectly clear. It's a dry, rattling thunder that shakes the pebbles on the ground. you scramble out of your sleeping mat and realize it's not a storm. It's an earthquake of hooves. You are witnessing the mobilization of the Grand Army of Mai Dunama II. If the previous kings were the ones who bought the first few sports cars, Dunama Dibalemi is the guy who bought the entire dealership. We are in the 13th century now, the absolute zenith of the first Kanem Empire. And the man in charge isn't just a king, he's a force of nature. You climb a small rocky outcrop to get a better view, and your jaw hits the floor. The horizon is choked with dust. Emerging from that brown haze are horses, not hundreds, thousands. The chronicles claim he commanded 40,000 horsemen. Now, historians love to argue about numbers. Medieval scribes were notorious for treating math like an interpretive art form. But even if we cut that number in half, or a quarter, you are still looking at one of the largest cavalry forces the African continent has ever seen. You watch as the columns ride past. It's endless. The sheer logistical nightmare of this operation hits you. Imagine the food. Imagine the water. Every day, this army consumes a small lake and a forest of grain. It's a moving city of consumption. Mai Dunama isn't just riding around looking cool. He is on a mission of aggressive expansion. You join the rearguard's safest place to be. Trust me, and you realize this isn't a raid, it's a conquest. The empire is stretching its arms out. To the north, they are pushing into the Fezzan, securing the trade routes all the way to the door of the Roman ruins in Libya. To the east, they are bullying the kingdoms of the Nile. To the west, they are eyeing the lands of the Hausa. You see the diversity in the ranks. This isn't a monolithic army, it's a coalition. You see lighter cavalry from the subject tribes, barely armored, riding fast and loose. Then you see the corps, the heavy cavalry, the elite Lafitte. These guys are starting to adopt the quilted armor that will become iconic later on. They look like medieval Michelin men, wrapped in layers of cotton so thick an arrow would just get tired and give up before reaching the skin. Dunama himself is somewhere up at the front, surrounded by drums and trumpets. So the noise is deafening. The psychological warfare is half the battle. Before the enemy even sees a spear, they hear the roar of 1,000 drums. It sounds like the apocalypse is keeping a beat. You watch a skirmish unfold against a rebellious tribe near the shores of the lake. It's brutal and short. The enemy tries to form a line, but Dunama's cavalry executes a pincer movement that is textbook perfection. They slam into the flanks, the enemy breaks. It's not a fight, it's a harvest. But amidst all this winning, you notice something unsettling about Dunama. He's intense, like staring into the sun, intense. He isn't just satisfied with political power, he wants total spiritual domination too. You see him arguing with his advisors in the command tent later that night. He is frustrated, he feels restricted. The old ways, the compromises his ancestors made between Islam and traditional beliefs are annoying him. He's a fundamentalist in a world of pragmatists. He wants to purify the state. He wants to scrape away the barnacles of the old animist traditions that still cling to the hull of the ship of state. This zeal makes him powerful, but it also makes him dangerous to his own people. You see the nervous glances of the clan elders. They remember that the king's power relies on a delicate balance. If he pushes too hard, if he breaks the taboos that hold the federation together, things could snap. There's a story circulating around the campfires, a rumor. Really, they say Dunama is eyeing the Mune. Remember that sacred object? The one nobody is supposed to touch? The one that guarantees the safety of the empire? Dunama thinks it's idolatry. He thinks keeping a secret box of pagan trinkets is an insult to Allah. You can feel the friction. The soldiers love him because he brings them victory and loot. The merchants love him because he keeps the roads safe. But the traditionalists, the keepers of the deep culture, are terrified of him. As the army camps for the night, spreading out like a vast carpet of fires across the savannah, you realize you are watching the peak of a roller coaster. The view is spectacular. The empire is huge. It stretches from the Niger River to the Nile, from the Sahara to the swamps. It is the Canem-Bornu Empire in bold capital letters. But gravity is waiting. Dunama Dibalemi is building a structure that depends entirely on his personal strength. He is centralizing everything. He is cutting out the middlemen, the minor chiefs, the local spirits. He is making himself the sole pillar of the state. And we all know what happens when you put too much weight on a single pillar. If it cracks, the roof comes down. You lie back on your saddle blanket, looking up at the stars that have guided these nomads for centuries. You can hear the distant chanting of the prayers, louder and more fervent than ever before. Dunama has made Kanem a superpower. But in his quest for purity and absolute control, he is about to make a mistake, a spiritual mistake. He is going to open the box. You are standing in a room that officially doesn't exist, or rather, a room that you are definitely not supposed to be in. The air here is stale, smelling of old leather, dried herbs, and that distinct, dusty scent of things that haven't been moved in centuries. You are in the inner sanctum of the royal court, and in the center of the room sits the Mune. It doesn't look like much. It's not a golden ark with cherubim on top, melting the faces of Nazis. It's likely a leather-wrapped bundle or a wooden casket, worn smooth by generations of silent guardianship. But the energy in the room is radioactive. You can see the hands of the elderly priests shaking. They are the keepers of the mystery, and they are currently looking at Mai Dunama II Dibalemi with a mixture of horror and resignation. This is the moment the roller coaster reaches the very top and pauses for that sickening second before the drop. Dunama is standing over the object. He looks impatient. To him, this bundle is an insult. It represents the old, superstitious past that he is trying to scrub away. Remember, he's a strictly Orthodox Muslim. In his eyes, keeping a secret talisman to guarantee the state's safety is basically cheating on God. It's shirk idolatry. He wants to prove a point. He wants to show his people that their safety comes from Allah and the king's strong arm, not from a spooky box of trinkets. You want to reach out and grab his shoulder. You want to say, "Hey, maybe don't open the cursed object. Have you never seen a horror movie? Nothing good ever comes out of the sealed container found in the basement." But you can't. You're just a ghost in the timeline. He gives the order. The priests hesitate. One of them actually weeps, silently tears, tracking through the dust on his face. This isn't just about religion. It's about the Constitution. The Mune represents the ancient pact between the tribes. It's the physical embodiment of the deal the Zaghawa clans made centuries ago. We follow you, and you keep the luck safe. Dunama draws his dagger. If they won't do it, he will. He cuts the leather thongs. He breaks the wax seals. The sound of the cracking wax is louder than a gunshot in the heavy silence. He throws the lid open. Now, here's where history gets a little weird and misty. According to the Diwan Salatan Bornutha, royal chronicles that kept track of all this drama, when the Mune was opened, something actually flew out. The text describes a white bird, or a creature resembling a bird, exploding from the box and flying out the window, vanishing into the sky. It's a chilling image. You watch as the luck of the empire literally flies the coop. The king looks into the box. It's empty now. He turns to his courtiers with a smug look that says, "See, it was just a bird. No lightning bolts, no demons. We're fine." But the room feels different. The heavy, pressurized atmosphere of divine mystery has evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow reality. You look at the faces of the tribal elders, the chiefs of the non-royal clans. They aren't looking at Dunama with awe anymore. They are looking at him with calculation. By opening the Mune, Dunama didn't just kill a superstition. He breached a contract. Historians still argue whether the Mune was a literal object containing a bird or a powerful metaphor for the secret council of the state. Some scholars suggest that opening the Mune actually meant Dunama exposed the secrets of the royal council to the public. Or perhaps he stripped the traditional nobility of their cryptic privileges. It's the medieval equivalent of leaking the nuclear codes to prove they aren't scary. But the effect is the same. The mystique is gone. The illusion that the king is a magical being protected by ancient forces is shattered. Now, he's just a guy. A guy with a lot of horses, sure, but just a man. And men can be killed. Men can be overthrown. You step out of the sanctum into the blinding sunlight of the courtyard. The army is still there, the wealth is still there, but the vibe has shifted. You can feel the whispers starting. The tribal leaders are going back to their tents, and they aren't discussing how great the king is. They are discussing how he disrespected the ancestors. They are asking, if he doesn't respect the Mune, why should we respect his tax collectors? It's a classic unboxing video gone wrong. He wanted to show there was nothing inside, but in doing so, he threw away the packaging that held the empire together. This act triggers a chain reaction that will plague the dynasty for generations. The Diwan says that after the bird flew away, strife and war were opened between the Magumi and the Balala. The Balala are a rival branch of the royal family, the cousins who didn't get the throne. For centuries, they stayed in line because of the spiritual awe of the kingship. Now, the gloves are off. You walk through the marketplace of the capital. The common people don't know exactly what happened in the palace, but rumors travel faster than camels. They say the king has cursed himself. They say the protection is gone. You see a merchant packing up his stall a little earlier than usual, looking nervously at the sky. Markets hate uncertainty, and the stock market of political stability just crashed. Dunama Dibalemi will spend the rest of his reign fighting. The expansion stops. The empire that was stretching its arms out suddenly has to cross them to protect its chest. He spends his final years putting down rebellions that he inadvertently started by trying to be a theological purist. It's a tragedy, really. You watch him later in life, an old man sitting on his throne. He's still powerful, still feared, but he looks tired. He realized too late that power isn't just about armies and laws, it's about shared stories. He burned the story that connected him to his people, and he didn't have a good enough one to replace it. As you wander away from the palace, the sun is setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the sand. The golden age of the First Empire is ending. The internal springs of the watch have been wound too tight, and they have snapped. You hear a sound in the distance, not the rhythmic, disciplined drums of the Grand Army, but the chaotic, wild drumming of the Balala warriors. They are coming. And this time, they aren't afraid of the God King. They know he's just a mortal who let the bird go. The moon is open, the luck is out, and the bill for 1,000 years of dominance is about to come due. You might want to find a helmet, because the next century is going to be a messy, violent divorce proceeding between the dynasty and its own people. You are crouching behind a crumbling mud wall, listening to the whistle of poisoned arrows thudding into the earth around you. Welcome to the 14th century. If the last century was the blockbuster superhero movie where the good guys won everything, this century is the gritty, depressing reboot where everyone dies in the first 10 minutes. You are witnessing the Balala Wars. Well, this is the bird coming home to roost, and it has brought friends with very sharp spears. The spiritual crack in the empire's foundation has turned into a physical chasm, and pouring out of that chasm are the Balala. Now, who are these guys? Imagine the Saifawa dynasty looking in a mirror and seeing a reflection that hasn't slept in a week and wants to punch them in the face. The Balala are essentially a rival branch of the royal family. They are the cousins who didn't get invited to the coronation. The pastoralists who stayed out in the bush while the Saifawa were building cities and reading books. They are tough, mobile, and relentless. And for the next 100 years, they are going to make life absolute hell for the kings of Kanem. You watch a skirmish unfold on the edge of the capital, in Jimi. It's chaotic. The disciplined cavalry charges you saw under Dunama are gone. Now, it's a messy, swirling melee. The Balala fight dirty. They don't line up for a fair fight. They raid supply lines, they poison wells, they attack at night. They are using the Saifawa's own nomadic tactics against them, but with a fresh ferocity that the settled urbanites of the capital have forgotten how to handle. Here is a mainstream historical fact that puts this into perspective. Between 1342 and 1352, just one decade Kanem burned through 4 different kings. 4, that's a turnover rate that would make a fast food manager cringe. Being the Mai is no longer a divine privilege. It's a death sentence. You watch the coronation of a new king, and the courtiers aren't celebrating. They are taking bets on how long he'll last. Will it be a year, a month, a week? You see a king named Mai trying to hold it together. He is a tragic figure. He spends his entire reign in the saddle, rushing from one burning village to another. You ride with him as he tries to corner the Balala chieftains. He wins battles, sure. He kills hundreds of them. But for every Balala warrior he cuts down, 2 more seem to pop up out of the sand. It's a game of whack-a-mole, played with scimitars. The stress on the empire is visible in the landscape. You walk through the fields that used to be green with sorghum and millet. They are scorched. The farmers have fled. The intricate trade networks that brought wealth from Tripoli, they are drying up because the merchants are terrified. Nobody wants to send a caravan of gold into a war zone. The insurance premiums are just too high. This brings us to a scholarly debate that historians still chew on. Were the Balala external invaders sweeping in to destroy a civilization? Or were they internal revolutionaries fighting against an oppressive, centralized state? Some scholars argue that this was a class war, the nomadic have-nots rising up against the urban haves. Others think it was purely a dynastic feud, a Game of Thrones-style struggle between Uncle Scar and Simba, but with more camels. Watching the hatred in the eyes of the Balala fighters as they torch a tax collector's house, you get the feeling it's a bit of both. They aren't just trying to take the throne, they are trying to dismantle the system. The low point comes with a king named Umar ibn Idris. You stand in his tent during a war council. The mood is funereal. The map on the table is shrinking. The Balala have pushed the Safwawa forces back, mile by bloody mile. They have surrounded the capital, the ancestral heartland of Kanem-Bornu, place where the dynasty began, where the graves of the first kings lies no longer safe. You witness a decision that is heartbreaking in its practicality. King Umar looks at his advisors and says, "The unthinkable, we have to leave." Not just a retreat, a migration. They have to abandon Kanem entirely. Imagine the United States government deciding that Washington, D.C. is too dangerous, so they are going to pack up the White House, the Congress, and the entire bureaucracy and move to Nebraska. That is the scale of what is happening here. You watch the preparations. It's a scene of organized despair. The royal archivists are packing the scrolls. The treasury is being loaded onto strong mules. But the most painful part is what they leave behind. You see the king visiting the royal tombs one last time? In this culture, abandoning your ancestors is a deep spiritual failing. It means leaving their spirits unprotected. It means admitting that the line of continuity has been broken. But there is a quirky, gritty detail to this evacuation that you might not expect. They don't just leave the city empty for the Balala to enjoy. You see soldiers poisoning the remaining wells and collapsing the irrigation ditches. It's a scorched earth policy in reverse. If they can't have the capital, nobody can. They are turning their beloved home into a wasteland to spite their cousins. As the massive caravan begins to form, you realize this isn't just an army moving, it's an entire civilization on the run. You see scholars carrying stacks of books, blacksmiths carrying their anvils, women carrying babies and cooking pots. It's the Trail of Tears, but led by a king who is swearing vengeance with every step. The destination is Bornu. It's a region to the southwest of Lake Chad. It's safer, protected by difficult terrain, but it's a backwater compared to the glorious east. To the elites of Kanem, moving to Bornu is like moving from Manhattan to a swamp in Jersey. They view it as a temporary exile. They tell themselves, "We'll be back in a few years." Spoiler alert, they won't be back for a long, long time. You trudge alongside the refugees as they cross the Komadugu-Yobe River. The water is muddy and slow. The people look back at the eastern horizon, where smoke is rising from their abandoned cities. The Balala have won. The first empire, the Empire of Kanem, has officially fallen. But here is the thing about the Saifawa dynasty. They are cockroaches. I mean that in the most complimentary way possible. You can step on them, you can burn their house down, you can chase them into the swamp, but you cannot kill them. They have a resilience that is frankly terrifying. As you cross into the new lands of Bornu, you notice a shift in the king's demeanor. The despair is hardening into something cold and iron-like. They have lost the past, so they are forced to invent a future. They are entering a strange land populated by the so people remember the giants, and they are going to have to fight for every inch of turf all over again. The Kanem chapter is closed. The Bornu chapter is opening. And while they look like beaten refugees right now, dragging their feet through the dust, you can see the glint of ambition still burning in the eyes of the young princes. They are already planning the comeback tour, but first, they have to survive the journey. And the reception committee in Bornutha indigenous tribes, who definitely didn't ask for thousands of angry armed squatters to show up, is waiting for them. You might want to refill your canteen. This migration is going to be long, hot, and full of people who are very grumpy about losing their real estate. You are walking, and your feet hurt. Actually, hurt is an understatement. Your feet feel like they have been tenderized by a meat mallet and then roasted over an open fire. You are part of the most depressing parade in history, the Great Migration of the Saifawa. We are no longer in the realm of grand conquests and golden ages. We are in the survival horror phase of the timeline. You are trekking southwest, leaving the ancestral lands of Kanem behind. Moving around the massive curvature of Lake Chad toward the land of Bornu. This isn't a weekend trip, this is a decades-long drift. You look around you and see the remnant of a superpower trying to maintain its dignity while living out of suitcases. The entire royal court is here. The scribes, the imams, the generals, the cooks, the concubines, everyone. It's a mobile city, a capital on wheels that crawls across the landscape like a massive, sluggish caterpillar. You walk alongside a cart piled high with leather-bound books. These are the legal texts, the genealogical records, the precious Qurans brought from Cairo. They are dusty and sun-bleached. It's a poignant sight, a civilization refusing to let go of its software, even though it has lost its hardware. The mood in the column is grim. The soldiers are constantly looking over their shoulders. The Balala raiders are still out there, nipping at the heels of the caravan like hyenas trailing a wounded buffalo. Every night, you don't sleep soundly. You sleep with one hand on a spear, waiting for the scream of a sentry. But as you trudge westward, the landscape begins to change. You are leaving the arid, sandy scrub of the trans-Saharan fringe and entering the greener, thicker savanna of the Bornu plains. The grass is taller here. There are more trees baobabs that look like they've been planted upside down, and dense thickets of acacia. To you, this might look like a nice change of scenery. Green means water, right? Water means life. To the Saifawa leadership, however, this landscape is a nightmare. Here is a mainstream historical fact that explains their anxiety. The Saifawa military machine was built for the open desert. Remember those heavy cavalry charges? You need flat, hard ground for that. You can T-launch a devastating shock charge if your horse is tripping over tree roots or getting tangled in elephant grass. This new terrain neutralizes their greatest advantage. They are moving from a bowling alley to a ball pit. And then there are the neighbors. You spot them watching from the ridgelines. The So people. We mentioned them briefly back in the Kanem days, but now you are walking right into their living room. In Bornu, the So are not just a minority, they are the dominant power. They live in walled towns, they know the terrain, and they are looking at this influx of desperate refugees with extreme skepticism. You witness a tense encounter at a watering hole. A Saifawa advance guard rides up, demanding water for the king's horses. The So villagers, standing on their mud brick walls, just laugh. They don't care about the Sultan of Yemen or the commander of the faithful. To them, these are just trespassing vagrants. This triggers a period of brutal, grinding warfare. You watch as the Safwa are forced to fight, not for conquest, but for survival. They have to besiege these little walled towns one by one. It's dirty, close-quarters combat. The cavalry is useless here, so the proud knights have to dismount and fight in the mud. It's humiliating for them, a constant reminder of how far they have fallen. But this migration isn't just about war, it's about cultural fusion. And this brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate. Historians have argued for years about what exactly happened to the So people. Did the Saifawa wipe them out in a genocidal conquest, or did they marry them? As you walk through the camp at night, you see the answer is yes, both. You see captured So women cooking by the fires, nursing children who will grow up speaking Kanuri, the language of the empire but carrying the genetics of the giants. You see Saifawa aristocrats adopting local So customs, eating local foods, and learning the local spirit geography. It's a hostile takeover, sure, but it's also a merger. The Saifawa are becoming Kanuri in the process. They are evolving from desert nomads into Savannah City. There is a quirky, fringe detail about this migration that you might miss if you aren't looking closely. Keep an eye on the king's personal baggage train. Amidst the gold and the weapons, there are strange, lumpy bundles wrapped in layers of cloth that never get opened in public. These are the Sangia portable charms and talismans. Even though the dynasty is officially Islamic, and even after Dunama's disastrous unboxing video with the Mun, the traumatic migration has forced a bit of a relapse. When you are homeless and hunted, you take all the help you can get. The kings are quietly collecting local, so talismans, hedging their bets again. They are carrying the luck of the new land to replace the luck they lost in the old one. The journey seems endless. You pass through the Komadugu-Yobe River Valley. It's fertile, lush, and teeming with fish. It's a paradise compared to the dry lands you left, but it has a buzz, a literal buzz. You slap a mosquito on your arm, then another. Then a tsetse fly lands on the neck of a horse next to you. The horse shudders. This is the invisible wall we talked about. The Saifawa have moved south, closer to the fly belt. They are dancing on the edge of the ecological zone where their horses can survive. If they go any further south, the army dies. So they are forced to stop here. They can't keep running. They have hit the biological finish line. You watch as the wandering court finally drives a stake into the ground. It's not a city yet, it's just a decision. The king, Mai Dunama, we'll get to him in a minute, looks at a patch of high ground near the river. It's defensible, it has water, it has trade access. This is it, the body language says. We stop walking. The relief in the camp is palpable. You see people collapsing, weeping, kissing the ground. They have been mobile for so long that the idea of a permanent roof feels like a fantasy. But don't get too comfortable. You look around at the new neighborhood. It's rough. To the north, you have the Tuareg, the blue men of the desert, who are already eyeing your trade caravans. To the west, the Songhai Empire is rising, a massive superpower that makes your current situation look pathetic. And all around you, the sullen So warriors are sharpening their iron spears, waiting for you to sleep. The Great Migration is over. The Safawa have survived the trek, but now they are strangers in a strange land, squatting on property that doesn't belong to them, with a decimated army and a bruised ego. You sit by the riverbank, dipping your aching feet in the cool water of the Yobe. You watch the sun go down over this new horizon. It's a different angle than the sunset over Lake Chad. The light is filtered through the dust of the Harmattan wind. It feels like the end of the story, doesn't it? The fallen empire hiding in the bushes. But you know better. You know that diamonds are formed under pressure, and the Saifawa are currently under about 10 gigapascals of geopolitical pressure. They aren't going to just hide here. They are going to build something, and they are going to build it big. They are about to construct a fortress that will make the old capital look like a campsite. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start laying bricks. Millions of them. You are standing in the mud again. But this time, the vibe is different. It's not the desperate, clinging mud of a refugee camp. It's the purposeful, industrial mud of a construction site. You are witnessing the moment the Safawa dynasty stops being a nomadic warband and decides to put down roots so deep that it will take a literal jihad to rip them out 3 centuries later. You are watching the birth of Birni Ngizargamu. The man pointing at the ground and shouting orders is Mai Dunama. If Dunama Dibalemi was the conqueror and the guys in the migration were the survivors, Dunama is the architect. He is the one who looked at his exhausted people, looked at the fertile banks of the Yobe River, and said, "We are building a house, and it's going to be a big one." And he wasn't kidding. You watch as thousands of laborers begin to dig. They aren't just digging a trench, they are sculpting the earth. They are raising a massive earthen rampart, a wall that will eventually circle the city for miles. This isn't the stone masonry of Europe, or the frantic wood palisade construction of the forest tribes. This is Sahelian earth engineering at its finest. You watch them mixing the clay, packing it down, layer by layer. It's hot, backbreaking work, but there is an electric energy in the air. For the first time in 100 years, these people aren't looking over their shoulders, they are looking forward. As the weeks turn into months and months into years, the city rises around you, and city is the right word. This isn't a collection of huts, it's a metropolis. You walk down the main avenue of the completed capital. It is massive. Historians estimate that at its peak, Birni Ngizargamu housed anywhere from 25,000 to arguably 200,000 people. Now, that upper number is a subject of intense scholarly debate. Demographers love to argue that medieval chroniclers were just counting zeros for fun, but even if you take the lower estimate, this is a staggering urban center for the region. In the middle of the savannah, it's a human hive. The layout is deliberate. You notice that the city radiates outward. At the center, like the bullseye of a target, is the palace of the Mai. Here is a quirky, specific detail that separates the royals from the plebs, the bricks. You look at the houses of the commoners, the merchants, and the minor nobles. They are made of tubali-sundried mud cones plastered over with clay. It's cool, efficient, and sustainable. But then you look at the palace. It's glowing with a reddish hue. The palace complex is built with burnt bricks. This might not sound like a big deal to you probably live in a house made of the stuff, but in this context, it's a technological flex of the highest order. Burning bricks requires kilns, massive amounts of firewood in a region where wood is precious, and specialized knowledge. By building a red brick palace in a city of brown mud, Dunama is sending a visual message. My house is eternal. Your house melts in the rain. We are not the same. You wander through the bustling markets. The fortress of the Sahel isn't just a bunker, it's a global hub. You hear a cacophony of languages. You hear Kanuri, obviously, But you also hear Hausa, Arabic, Fulfeld, and the dialects of the Tuareg. This is the genius of Bornu Empire. It's positioned perfectly. It sits right at the intersection of the trade routes, coming down from Tripoli and Cairo, and the routes going west to the Hausa states and south to the forest zone. It's the ultimate toll booth. If you want to move goods across Central Africa, you have to come through here, and you have to pay the Mai his cut. You stop at a stall selling kola nuts from the southern forests. The merchant is arguing with a buyer from North Africa who wants to pay in Venetian glass beads. This is the globalization of the 15th century happening in real time. The city is a machine that turns geography into gold. But it's not just about money, it's about prestige. You walk toward the mosque district. It's humming with activity. Scholars are gathering here, drawn by the stability of the new capital. They are setting up madrasas schools. You see students sitting in circles in the dust, memorizing the Quran. This city is becoming a brain drain magnet. If you were a smart kid in a village 300 miles away, you packed your bags and came to Bornu Empire because that's where the libraries were. However, there is a darker side to this urban explosion. You notice the strict segregation. The city is divided into quarters based on ethnicity and profession. It's not a melting pot, it's a salad bowl. The different groups live side by side but remain distinct. And overseeing it all is a secret police force that would make the KGB nod in appreciation. You see men with veiled faces moving silently through the crowd. These are the agents of the Dogari, the royal police. In a city this big, filled with potential rivals and foreign spies, the Mai can't take any chances. The walls of the city keep the enemies out, but the Dogari keep the enemies within from getting too comfortable. You climb to the top of the earthen rampart to watch the sunset. From here, you can see the sheer scale of the achievement. The walls stretch out, creating a vast protective embrace around the population. The refugee phase is officially over. The Safwa are no longer squatters, they are landlords. But looking out at the horizon, you realize that a fixed address comes with a new set of problems. When you were nomads, you could run away from trouble. Now, you are a sitting duck. A very large, rich, brick-plated duck. Every warlord, raider, and rival king in a 1,000-mile radius knows exactly where you are. They know where your treasure is kept. They know that if they can breach these walls, they win the jackpot. You can see the dust of a patrol riding out. They are the guardians of this new fortress. They have to push the perimeter out, creating a buffer zone so deep that no enemy can ever get close enough to see the red bricks of the palace. This need for a buffer zone is going to drive the next phase of history. The Safwa have built the engine. Now they need to fuel it. And the fuel of this empire, as we've seen, is military expansion. Ali Gaji has given them a home. Now, his successors need to give them an empire worthy of this capital. As the call to prayer drifts up from the hundreds of mosques below, mingling with the smoke of cooking fires, you feel the weight of permanence. This city will stand here for over 300 years. It will see the rise of muskets, the fall of Songhai, and the coming of the Europeans. It will become a legend in Europe, a place marked on maps as a city of gold and mystery. But tonight, it's just a new home. The mortar is still drying. The Safwa have unpacked their bags, and they are looking at the map with hungry eyes. The defensive era is ending. The offensive era is about to begin. And to go on the offense, you need armor. Not for the walls, but for the warriors. You need to turn your cavalry into tanks. You are standing on the dusty parade grounds, just outside the great walls of Bornu Empire. The sun is approaching its zenith, hanging in the sky like a white-hot coin. You're sweating just standing here in your light tunic. But the men you are looking at, they are about to ride into a furnace, and they are dressing for winter. You are witnessing the suiting up of the Lafidi, the elite heavy cavalry of the Bornu Empire. And if you expecting shining steel breastplates or chainmail hauberks like something out of a King Arthur movie, you need to adjust your expectations. These guys look like weaponized mattresses. I don't mean that as a slight. The armor they are putting on is one of the most ingenious adaptations to warfare in a tropical climate ever devised. It's not metal, it's cotton. Layer upon layer upon layer of heavy coarse cotton cloth, stuffed with kapok, a natural fiber that's like cotton on steroids, or tightly packed wool. You watch a squire roar, whatever the Kanuri equivalent is, likely a young slave or apprentice helping a knight into his gear. The armor is called a lablab or lafedi, depending on the specific piece. It's incredibly thick. We talking about a garment that might have 20 or 30 layers of fabric quilted together so tightly that it feels less like a shirt and more like a car tire. Now, you might be thinking, wait, they're fighting with pillows. But let's do a quick reality check on the physics here. If you wear a suit of iron plate armor in the Sahara, where temperatures regularly hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit, you aren't a soldier. You are a pot roast. Metal conducts heat. After an hour in the sun, that breastplate would be hot enough to literally burn your skin. You'd die of heat stroke before you even saw the enemy. Cotton, on the other hand, is an insulator. Sure, it's hot inside that suit. You can see the sweat pouring down the knight's face, but it does uncook him. It creates a microclimate that is survivable, and defensively, it's brilliant. You walk up to one of the suits hanging on a rack. You punch it. It thuds. It's rock hard. This isn't fluffy. The compression makes it dense. If an enemy shoots an arrow at this from a distance, the arrowhead doesn't pierce. It gets tangled in a mesh of fibers. The friction stops it. If someone swings a sword, the blade doesn't slide off like it would on steel. It sinks in and gets stuck, or the blow is absorbed by the padding like a shock absorber. It turns a lethal slash into a really bad bruise, but the coolness factor doesn't stop at the rider. You look at the horses, they are getting the same treatment. This is a sight that would terrify any infantryman. The horses are being draped in massive quilted caparisons that cover them from nose to tail. They have customized masks with holes cut out for their eyes and ears. When fully geared up, the horse and rider look like a single monstrous entity, a soft-shelled tank rumbling across the savannah. However, there is a scholarly debate that hovers around these puffy warriors like a cloud of dust. Historians have argued for decades about the origins of this armor. Some say it was an import, copied from the padded armor used by Crusaders or Arabs in the Middle East. Others argue it was a purely indigenous invention, evolved from local hunting gear. The most likely answer is that it was a convergence. Everyone hates getting stabbed, and everyone hates heat stroke. Padded armor is the universal solution for "I want to survive a battle near the equator." You watch the unit mount up. It's a slow process. The weight is immense. A fully armored knight needs help getting into the saddle. This isn't a nimble force. They aren't going to be doing trick riding or galloping circles around the enemy. They are a battering ram. The tactic is simple and brutal. You form a line of these quilted giants. You point them at the enemy center and you trot forward. You don't even need to go that fast. You just need to be unstoppable. The enemy arrows rain down and bounce off or stick harmlessly in the cotton. The enemy spears glance off the horse's flanks. The Lefidi close the distance, and then they use their long spears to skewer the lighter infantry. It's a steamroller made of fabric. But there is a quirky economic side to this armor that you can't ignore. In the Bornu Empire, cloth isn't just a material, it's money. Literally, the standard currency of the region is the gabaga strips of cotton cloth. So, when you look at these knights, you aren't just seeing soldiers, you are seeing men wearing bank accounts. A single suit of Lefidi armor represents thousands of gabaga strips. It represents acres of cotton fields, hundreds of hours of spinning and weaving, and the labor of specialized tailors. To field a cavalry force of 3,000 men like this is an act of obscene wealth. It's the equivalent of an army marching into battle wearing suits made of Santa Cruz $100 bills. This visual display is part of the weapon. When a rival tribe sees the Bornu army approaching, they aren't just scared of the spears, they are demoralized by the budget. They look at that wall of expensive cotton and think, we can't beat money like that. You stand back as the squadron begins a drill. The sound is muffled. You don't hear the clank-clank of metal. You hear the creak of leather and the heavy, dull thud of hooves. It's an eerie, suffocating sound. But let's be real for a second. The experience inside that suit must be hellish. You can smell it from here, the stench of old sweat, unwashed wool, and horse. These suits are hard to clean. You probably don't wash them. You just air them out and hope for the best. Being a knight is glorious, but it definitely isn't hygienic. The Lefidi are the hammer of the empire. They are the reason Bornu can smash the walled towns of the rebellion and trample the Tuareg raiders. But a hammer is useless without a hand to swing it, and a hand is useless without food to fuel it. Or in this case, salt. You watch the knights ride off, a wall of white and indigo bobbing in the heat haze. They are expensive to maintain. They need horses, they need grooms, they need food, and they need this fancy armor. The empire needs a constant, massive stream of revenue to keep this military machine running. And while they have gold, and they have ivory, and they have slaves, there is one commodity that is more valuable than all of them combined in this region. It's the white gold of the Sahara. It's the one thing that human beings literally cannot survive without in the desert heat. You turn your gaze north, toward the endless dunes. The knights are training here, but the real lifeline of the empire is out there. In the desolate salt pans of Bilma, if the Saifawa want to keep their knights in cotton, they need to control the salt. Grab your water skin and wrap a scarf around your face. We're leaving the comfort of the capital. We're going to join a caravan on the most dangerous highway in the world. You leave the noise of the capital behind, trading the rhythmic thud of armored hooves for a silence so profound it feels like pressure in your ears. You are walking north, away from the savannah, away from the grass, and into the teeth of the tenor. This is the desert within the desert. It is a landscape of such hostility that NASA could use it to fake Mars landings. But you aren't alone. You are walking in the shadow of a beast that looks like a disgruntled sofa on stilts. You have joined the Azali, the Great Salt Caravan. Ahead of you and behind you, stretching for miles in a single file line, are camels, not dozens, thousands. At the height of the Bornu Empire's power, these caravans could consist of up to 20,000 camels. It's a freight train made of flesh and fur. The smell is specific. It's a mix of dry dust, camel musk, and the sweat of men who haven't seen a bath in 3 weeks. You are heading to Bilma, an oasis town deep in the Kawar region of today's Niger. It is the Fort Knox of the Sahara. But instead of gold bars, the treasure here is salt. Now, you might be thinking all this effort for table seasoning, but you have to reset your modern brain. In the medieval Sahel, salt isn't a condiment. It is a biological necessity. You've felt the heat. You know how much you sweat. Without salt replacement, people here die. Their muscles cramp, their hearts fail. Salt is life. Furthermore, it's the only way to preserve food in a world without refrigeration. If you want your meat to last more than a day, you need salt. This makes the Bilma Trail the most important artery in the empire. You trudge along, wrapping your tagelmust veil tighter against the wind. The logistics of this operation are mind-bending. You watch the caravan master, the Madagu. He is less a merchant and more an admiral of a land fleet. He navigates by the stars, in the featureless dunes. Getting lost doesn't mean you're late, it means you're dead. There are no landmarks, the wind erases footprints in minutes. A mainstream historical fact for your back pocket, the Safwa dynasty's longevity was on just about cool armor, or divine kings. It was about their stranglehold on this specific route. By controlling the path to Bilma, they controlled the thermostat of the regional economy. If a rival state annoyed them, they didn't have to invade. They just closed the road. No salt means no survival. As you approach the oasis after weeks of walking, you see the mines. They aren't deep tunnels, they are evaporation ponds. You watch men working in the briny water, harvesting the crust. They shape the salt into heavy cone-shaped pillars or slabs. Here is a quirky specific detail about the product. It's not just one type of salt. They are harvesting natron sodium carbonate for medicine and textile dyeing, and pure sodium chloride for eating. The traders can tell the difference by taste and color: red salt for animals, white salt for humans. It's a sophisticated chemical industry run by guys with pickaxes. You watch the loading process. A camel can carry about 2 slabs, roughly 200,300 pounds. The value is insane. In the markets of the south, away from the desert, a slab of salt could be exchanged for its weight in gold dust, or for prime slaves, or for luxury horses. You are watching a transformation of value. Dust becomes gold just by moving it 500 miles south. But the journey back is where the tension spikes. You are now a moving target. You are carrying millions of dollars in inventory through a lawless void. This brings us to a scholarly debate that still echoes in the halls of African history departments, who actually controlled this trade. The Safwa kings claimed they did. Their chronicles are full of boasts about securing the roads. But many historians argue that the real power lay with the Tuareg confederations. The Tuareg were the gatekeepers. They could guide you or they could rob you. The Safwa often had to pay massive protection fees to the Tuareg chiefs to let the caravans pass. Was it an empire, or was it a massive extortion racket that the Safwa were just managing? You feel this ambiguity firsthand. You see a group of veiled riders on the horizon, Tuareg scouts. The caravan guards tense up, hands go to sword hilts. The Madigu rides out to meet them. You see a pouch of coins or a bundle of cloth change hands. The riders nod and vanish. It's a business transaction. Peace is a rental agreement out here. The return journey is grueling. The camels are tired, the water skins are light. You see the skeletons of animals and, sometimes, people bleaching in the sun along the trail. They call this the Road of Bones for a reason. Every successful arrival in Birni and Gazargamu is a miracle of endurance. When the walls of the capital finally appear on the horizon, the relief is physical. You watch the caravan spill into the market square. It's chaos. The salt is unloaded. The economy breathes a sigh of relief. Prices stabilize. The king gets his tax cut from every slab. This trade funds the Leafity armor. It funds the brick palace. It funds the scholars. The sweat of the salt miners in Bilma effectively pays for the prayers of the imams in the capital. But as you wash the dust from your face, you realize something. The system is fragile. The Tuareg are getting greedy. The Balala are still lurking in the east. The protection racket model is becoming too expensive. The empire needs a leader who doesn't just pay off the bandits, but crushes them. A leader who can modernize the military, not just with more horses, but with something new. The salt trade has built the foundation, but the walls are shaking. The 16th century is approaching, and it demands a man of iron. You're about to meet him. His name is Idris Alooma, and he's not interested in paying protection money anymore. He's about to introduce the Sahel to the concept of total war. You are standing in the shadow of a baobab tree, watching the dust settle on a parade ground that looks very different from the ones you saw a century ago. The air is sharper here, charged with a terrifying competence. The era of the desperate migration is a distant memory. The era of the protection racket with the Tuareg is officially over. You are about to meet the man who didn't just stabilize the empire. He grabbed it by the throat and shook it until it behaved. Enter my Idris Alooma. If Ali Gaji was the architect who built the house, Idris Alooma is the general who turned that house into a fortress and then annexed the entire neighborhood. We are in the late 16th century now, and you are witnessing the career of the most celebrated ruler in Kanem-Bornu history. You see him inspecting the troops. He isn't a distant, mysterious figure hiding behind a screen like the early Dugwa kings. He is right there in the mud, checking the hooves of the horses, inspecting the stitching on the quilted armor. He is a Hansen CEO of violence. He was born after his father Dida, posthumous child which, in the superstitious logic of the time, marked him for greatness. He had to fight his way to the throne through the usual tangle of royal cousins, and that struggle stripped him of any patience for incompetence. You notice a massive shift in the logistics of the army. Remember the baggage trains of the past? They were slow, relying on oxen and donkeys that ate as much as they carried and died if you looked at them wrong. Look at what Alooma is doing. He is replacing them with camels. This sounds like a minor tweak, like switching from a gas car to a hybrid. But in the context of Sahelian warfare, it's a revolution. You watch a column of camels being loaded with grain and water. These animals can travel 3 times as far as an ox, carry twice as much, and don't need to stop for water every few hours. This means the Bornu army can now project power deep into the desert, into the dry zones where their enemies used to hide. There is no safe distance from Idris Alooma anymore. If you exist on a map, he can reach you. Alooma doesn't just chase them, he builds. You see workers laying red bricks. He builds a fort, fills it with soldiers, and suddenly the local raiders can't move without being seen. He is slowly, methodically turning the Wild West into a police state. And speaking of police, let's talk about the law. You walk back into the capital and notice the atmosphere is stricter. The loose, live and let live syncretism of the past is gone. Alooma is a devout, possibly fanatical Muslim. He has decided that the reason the empire suffered in the past was moral laxity. You witness a trial in the marketplace. In the old days, disputes were settled by customary law basically, the village elders deciding what was fair based on tradition. Not anymore. Now, there is a Qadi, a judge reading from a book of Sharia law. The judgment is swift and harsh. Here is a quirky specific detail that shows his obsession with control. Idris Alooma hated the fact that the local grandees, the powerful tribal chiefs, would fight private wars with each other. It was messy and wasted resources, so he forced them all to submit to the Supreme Court of the Mai. He basically nationalized justice. You see a powerful noble, a man who owns 1,000 cattle, standing humbly before the judge, realizing that his family name doesn't get him out of a parking ticket anymore. This brings us to a scholarly debate that colors this entire era. Was Idris Alooma a brilliant innovator who came up with all this on his own? Or was he just a very good copycat? Some historians argue that Alooma's reforms were entirely indigenous natural evolution. Of the Kanem military tradition, they point to his creative use of local terrain and his specific untenumid tactics as proof of his local genius. He went on Hajj to Mecca early in his reign, and on that trip he saw the modern world. He saw the disciplined janissaries of the Turks. He saw their bureaucracy, and the argument goes that he came back and said, "I want that." But in Bornu, you can see the evidence of this copycat theory in the way he handles the So people, the indigenous giants we mentioned earlier. He is done marrying them. He is done negotiating. He is waging a total war of annihilation against the holdouts. You ride with him on a campaign to the shores of Lake Chad. The So warriors are hiding in the marshes, using their knowledge of the water to ambush the cavalry. Standard tactics don't work here. The horses sink in the mud. So, what does Alooma do? He builds a navy. You watch, stunned, as the Desert Empire deploys a fleet of large, flat-bottomed boats. He commands the waterways as ruthlessly as the sand dunes. He cuts off their escape routes. He starves them out. It's a brutal, methodical crushing of the indigenous culture. You are watching the final consolidation of the state. There is no more us and them. There is only subjects of the Mai. The level of control is suffocating, but effective. The roads are safe. You can walk from one end of the empire to the other with a bag of gold on your head, and nobody will touch you, mostly because they are terrified that Idris Alooma will find out and burn their entire village down. But there is one thing missing. You watch the king pacing in his tent at night. He is winning. Yes, his camel logistics are working. His brick forts are holding. But he is still fighting with the same weapons his grandfather used. Spears, swords, arrows. He knows that to the north, across the desert, and to the east, in the Ottoman lands, there is a new magic. A thunder that kills from a distance. He knows that no matter how thick his quilted armor is, it won't stop a lead ball moving at the speed of sound. He calls for his ambassadors. He is writing letters to Tripoli. He is writing letters to the Sublime Porte in Istanbul. He is asking for the ultimate upgrade. He doesn't just want recognition, he wants fire sticks. You feel the anticipation in the camp. The soldiers are whispering about the weapon that breathes smoke. They're afraid of it, but Alooma craves it. He knows that whoever possesses this technology controls the future. As you look at the disciplined ranks of the army, the standardized tunics, the whelped camels, you realize that Idris Alooma has built the perfect software. The discipline, the logistics, the command structure, it's all ready. Now, he just needs to install the hardware. The Turks are coming, and they are bringing something that will change the sound of African warfare forever. You might want to cover your ears. You are standing at the northern gate of Birni and Gazargamu, shielding your eyes against the midday glare. You've seen caravans arrive here 1,000 times, lines of camels carrying salt, copper, and cloth. But today, the caravan approaching the city feels different. The men walking alongside the beasts are wearing the indigo robes of the Tuareg, or the simple tunics of the Kanuri. They are wearing baggy trousers, strange felt caps, and vests embroidered with intricate patterns. And they are carrying long, heavy iron tubes over their shoulders. You are witnessing the arrival of the Turks. Now, Turks is a bit of a catch-all term here. These men are likely a mix of Ottoman janissaries, mercenaries from Tripoli, and military advisors sent by the Pasha. But to the people of the Sahel, they might as well be aliens landing a spaceship. They represent the cutting edge of military technology in the 16th century. Idris Alooma has finally got his wish. After years of diplomatic letters, gifts of giraffes sent to Istanbul, and swearing allegiance to the Ottoman Caliph, the Sublime Porte has sent a care package, and it's a package that goes boom. You follow these strangers to the training ground. They set up targets' thick wooden shields and clay pots. The Kanuri soldiers gather around, whispering. They've heard rumors of the weapon that breathes fire, but seeing it is another matter. One of the Turkish instructors steps forward. He begins the agonizingly slow process of loading a matchlock musket. Getty Images, you watch him pour the coarse black powder down the barrel. He rams the lead ball down, he primes the pan. He blows on the slow-burning match cord a piece of rope soaked in saltpeter that smells like rotten eggs and campfire. It takes forever. In the time it takes him to prep this thing, a competent archer could have turned him into a pincushion 3 times over. But then, he shoulders the weapon. He pulls the lever crack. The sound is physically painful in the dry air. A cloud of sulfuric white smoke erupts, obscuring the shooter. You cough, waving the smoke away. When it clears, the wooden shield 50 yards away is shattered. A hole the size of a thumb has been punched right through the hardwood. The silence on the parade ground is absolute. The Kanuri Knights, safe inside their quilted armor, look at each other with wide eyes. They know that no amount of cotton padding is stopping that. This is the gunpowder revolution, arriving in Central Africa. But here is the quirky reality check. These guns are objectively terrible. They are heavy, they foul up constantly, and if the sand gets in the mechanism, which, let's be honest, it's the Sahara, sand is everywhere. They explode in your face. However, in this context, they don't need to be good. They just need to be scary. You watch as Idris Alooma organizes a new corps of musketeers. He doesn't give these weapons to the nobles. Oh no, the nobles are too proud. They want to ride horses and look heroic. He gives the guns to his household slaves. This is a brilliant power move. He is creating a unit of soldiers whose only loyalty is to him, armed with weapons that can kill the nobles. It's the ultimate insurance policy against a coup. This brings us to a scholarly debate that historians love to pick apart. Just how Ottoman was this connection? For a long time, colonial historians assumed that Bornu became an Ottoman puppet state, but modern scholars argue it was much more cynical. Idris Alooma used the idea of the Ottoman Caliph to boost his own prestige, but he kept the Turks at arm's length. He took their guns and their advisors, but he didn't take their orders. It was a technology transfer, not a political submission. You ride out with the army to see the debut of this new weapon. The enemy is a group of defiant pagan tribesmen who have holed up in a rocky hill fortress. In the past, this would have been a bloody siege. The cavalry couldn't ride up the rocks, so the infantry would have to storm it, taking massive casualties. Not today. You watch the Turkish advisors line up the musketeers. They aren't aiming at individual people. They are just pointing at the massive enemies on the rocks. The command is given a ripple of fire and smoke tears across the line. The effect is psychological devastation. The enemy has never heard a sound like this. They see their comrades falling with invisible wounds, bleeding from holes that shouldn't exist. They see the smoke and assume it's sorcery. Panic spreads instantly. They aren't fighting men, they are fighting thunder. The enemy breaks and runs, and the cavalry rides them down. It's a massacre. But the most important thing the Turks brought wasn't actually the muskets, it was the discipline. You watch the drills? The Turks are teaching the Kanuri soldiers to stand in lines, to fire in volleys, to reload under pressure. They are introducing the concept of drilled infantry to a region that glorified individual heroic combat. Idris Alooma is ecstatic. He now has a combined arms force. He has the heavy cavalry to smash the open plains, the camel corps for long-range logistics, the boat navy for the lake, and now the musketeers to crack fortifications. He is playing for D-chess while everyone else is playing checkers. As the sun sets over the smoking battlefield, you see the Turkish mercenaries sitting apart from the main camp, drinking strong coffee and smoking pipes. They look bored. To them, this is just another frontier war. But to the people of the Sahel, the world has irrevocably changed. The gap between the haves gunpowder empires and the have-nots, everyone else has just opened up. And Idris Alooma is standing firmly on the side of the haves. But a weapon is only as good as the targets you use it on. And Alooma has a very specific target in mind. Remember the Sao, the giants, the original inhabitants who have been a thorn in the dynasty's side for 3 centuries. Idris Alooma looks at his new muskets, then looks at the high, thick walls of the Sao cities. He smiles. It's time to finish the job that his ancestors started. The giants are about to meet the gunpowder age, and it's not going to be a fair fight. You are standing in the long shadow of a wall that feels less like a structure and more like a geological feature. It rises 30 feet straight up out of the flat savanna. sheer cliff face of packed earth and clay, baking in the relentless sun. You are outside one of the great city-states of the Sao civilization. For 300 years, ever since the Saifawa refugees first stumbled into this region, these walls have been the ultimate do-not-enter sign. The Sathos legendary giants we've mentioned have sat behind these ramparts, effectively saying, "You can have the open fields, but the cities are ours." They have been the bones stuck in the throat of the empire. They raid, they retreat behind the walls, and they laugh as the Safwa arrows bounce off the hardened clay. But today, nobody is laughing. You look to your left and see the army of Idris Alooma arrayed for battle. But they aren't charging, they aren't screaming, they are working. You witness a tactic that is chilling in its banality. Alooma isn't trying to storm the walls immediately, that's for amateurs. Instead, you hear the rhythmic thwack-thwack-thwack of 1,000 axes. He is cutting down the trees. Now, this might seem like a landscaping dispute gone wrong, but in the context of the Sao culture and the Sahelian environment, this is a war crime. These massive baobab and acacia trees are the lifeblood of the city. They provide the only shade for the cattle outside the walls. They produce fruit and fodder. And, crucially, they are often sacred shrines to the local spirits. By chopping them down, Alooma is doing two things. He is destroying the city's future economic capacity, and he is publicly executing their gods. You watch the Sao defenders on the walls. They are screaming, throwing spears, trying to stop the destruction. But they can't reach the axemen. And every time a defender pops his head up to get a better aim, crack, the Turkish-trained musketeers are waiting. This is the end of the Age of Heroes. A Sao warrior, a man who might have trained for 20 years to become a master of the spear, a man whose physical strength is the stuff of legend, steps up to the parapet. A scrawny conscript with a matchlock, who has been a soldier for 3 weeks, pulls a trigger from 100 yards away. The lead ball hits the warrior in the chest. He falls. The math of war has changed. Skill no longer matters. Physics does. You watch as the psychological weight of this siege crushing the city. The Sao are trapped. Their crops are burning. Their trees are falling. Their best warriors are dying from invisible strikes. The giants are being dismantled, not by a bigger giant, but by a machine. The assault, when it finally comes, is brutal. You watch the Kanuri infantry, supported by the terrifying noise of the guns, scale the earthworks. The fighting inside is hand-to-hand, a desperate claustrophobic struggle in the narrow mud-brick alleyways. But the outcome is inevitable. The combined arms doctrine of Idris Alooma cavalry cutting off the escape, muskets suppressing the defense, infantry clearing the streets is a buzzsaw. As the dust settles, you walk through the breached gates. It's a somber scene. You are walking through the wreckage of a civilization that has existed here for a millennium. The Sao pottery, those massive, beautiful urns that archaeologists will dig up centuries later, are smashed on the ground. The shrines are toppled. This brings us to a heavy mainstream historical fact. The campaigns of Idris Alooma against the Sao effectively ended them as a distinct political entity. They were absorbed. The survivors were enslaved or integrated into the lower rungs of Bornu society. Their genes lived on contributing to the height and stature of the Kanuri people, but their culture was effectively erased. It's a classic example of imperial consolidation. To build the new nation, the old one had to be buried. But there is a quirky, almost petty detail in the chronicles about how Alooma handled this victory. He didn't just burn the city and leave, he forced the surviving Sao leaders to move. He relocated them to new villages right next to his new military forts. It's the ultimate micromanagement. He put them in a suburban HOA where the HOA president was a garrison commander with a gun. He broke their tribal cohesion by physically rearranging their geography. He turned them from rivals into tenants. You stand in the center of the conquered plaza. The smoke is stinging your eyes. The soldiers are looting carefully under the watchful eyes of the royal tax collectors. Of course, you realize that the internal threats to the empire are now gone. The Balala have been pushed back. The Sao have been crushed. The Tuareg have been bribed or bullied into submission. For the first time in its history, the Canem-Bornu Empire is secure in its own house. The doors are locked, the windows are barred. The landlord is armed. This security creates a surplus of energy. If you don't have to spend all your time fighting your neighbors, what do? You start looking further afield. You start thinking about your place in the wider world. Idris Alooma isn't satisfied with being the king of the Sahel. He wants to be a player on the Mediterranean stage. He wants the Ottomans, the Moroccans, and the Tunisians to know his name. He wants respect. And how do you get respect in the 16th century? You don't send an email, you send a giraffe. You see the preparations beginning in the royal court. The diplomats are brushing off their best robes. The scribes are drafting flowery letters in perfect classical Arabic. And the animal handlers are trying to figure out how to walk a 20-foot herbivore across the Sahara Desert without it dying. The wars of conquest are winding down. The wars of diplomacy are about to begin. You might want to brush up on your court etiquette, because we are about to leave the bloody trenches of the Sao War and enter the high-stakes poker game of international relations. You are walking next to the most awkward diplomatic gift in human history. It is 20 feet tall, has eyelashes that would make a beauty influencer jealous, and is currently looking at the endless sands of the Sahara with an expression of mild confusion. You are part of the royal caravan of Mai Idris Alooma, but this isn't a trade mission or a raid. It is a charm offensive. You are walking a giraffe to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, just pause and appreciate the logistics of this. You are taking a massive herbivore that eats hundreds of pounds of acacia leaves a day, requires gallons of water, and has legs as fragile as porcelain stilts, and you are marching it across one of the most hostile deserts on Earth. It is a logistical nightmare. It requires a dedicated team of handlers, specialized fodder carriers, and a pace that is agonizingly slow. But as you trudge north, shielding your eyes from the glare, you realize why the Mai is doing this. This giraffe isn't just an animal. It is a biological flex. It is a living, breathing proof of concept. By sending a creature from the deep savannah to the stone streets of Tripoli and eventually the marble courts of Istanbul, Idris Alooma is saying, "Look at my reach. I control the lands where the monsters live. I can extract the rarest treasures of the continent and deliver them to your doorstep alive." When you finally arrive in Tripoli, the effect is electric. You watch the crowds gather. The Ottoman governor, the Pasha, comes out to inspect the arrival. He has seen gold before. He has seen slaves before. But he has never seen this. The giraffe towers over the city walls. It is an alien spectacle. This is the high-stakes world of giraffe diplomacy. You stand in the courtyard of the Red Castle in Tripoli, listening to the Bornu ambassadors. They are smooth, they aren't begging, they are negotiating. They present the giraffe, along with bags of gold dust and a retinue of eunuchs, as a brotherly gift to the Ottoman Sultan. Note the word brotherly. This brings us to a spicy scholarly debate. The Ottoman archives in Istanbul often list Bornu as a vassal-stated distant province that owed allegiance to the Caliph. But if you read the letters the Mai sent, the tone is very different. He writes as an equal. He calls the Ottoman Sultan the Sultan of the North, while referring to himself as the Sultan of the South. Historians argue about who was playing whom. Were the Ottomans deluding themselves that they owned Bornu? Or was Idris Alooma cleverly letting them think that, just to keep the supply of muskets flowing? Watching the ambassador sip coffee with the Pasha, you get the sense that Bornu knows exactly what it's doing. They are trading an exotic pet for the keys to military supremacy, and it works. You watch the loading of the return caravan. It's not full of trinkets, it's full of hardware. Crates of matchlocks, barrels of gunpowder, fine Arabian horses to replenish the breeding stock, and perhaps most importantly, artisans, gunsmiths, trainers, and architects being lent to the Mai. But the diplomacy doesn't stop at Tripoli. You follow the embassy as it boards a ship. You are heading to the center of the world, Istanbul. The sea voyage is rough. You are seasick, and you can only imagine how the giraffe feels if it even made it this farfin. They were presented to the local pasha. But sometimes the exotic goods went all the way to the Topkapi Palace. Standing in the shadow of the Hagia Sophia, the ambassadors of Bornu are a striking sight. They wear the indigo robes of the Sahel, distinct from the kaftans of the Turks. They are navigating a court filled with Venetians, Persians, and Russians, and they are holding their own. They are securing a defense pact. You see, there is a looming threat that worries both Bornu and the Ottomans, the Saudi Sultanate of Morocco. The Moroccans are aggressive. They are eyeing the Songhai Empire to the west, which they will famously destroy in 1591. Bornu wants to make sure the Moroccans don't get any ideas about turning east. By aligning with the Ottomans, the theoretical overlords of the Islamic world, Bornu is buying an insurance policy. If Morocco attacks them, they are attacking a friend of the Caliph. It's a geopolitical checkmate. Here is a quirky, specific detail about these diplomatic missions. They were incredibly slow. A round trip could take 2 or 3 years. You are reading a letter from the Mai that asks about the health of a sultan who might have died 6 months ago. The lag in this server is insane. Yet the relationship holds. You see the ambassadors purchasing other things too, not just guns. They are buying luxury goods chainmail from Cairo, brocades from Damascus, books on jurisprudence. They are plugging Bornu into the cosmopolitan grid of the Mediterranean. Back in the capital of Berniangas-Argamu, the arrival of the return embassy is a national holiday. You watch the crates being opened. The people cheer at the sight of the guns, but the scholars cheer at the sight of the books. Idris Alooma is building a library as fast as he is building an army. You are witnessing the peak of Bornu's soft power. They aren't just terrifying warriors, they are sophisticated global citizens. They discuss the theology of Baghdad in the dust of the Sahel. They drink coffee from cups made in China, brought via the Red Sea trade. But as you watch the Mai celebrate his diplomatic triumphs, you notice something, or rather, someone watching from the sidelines. Idris Alooma is the face of the empire. He is the name on the letters. But in the corridors of the palace, there is another power structure at work. A structure that doesn't rely on giraffes or guns, but on blood and lineage. You see a woman walking through the inner courtyard. She is elderly, wrapped in fine white cotton, moving with a slowness that commands more respect than the marching of soldiers. The courtiers, even the toughest generals, bow lower to her than they do to the princes. This is the Mojira, the queen mother, while the Mai is out playing 4D chess with the Ottoman sultan. She is the one making sure the pieces on the board at home don't fall over. The history books, written mostly by men, love to focus on the kings and their wars. But if you want to understand how this dynasty survived for 1,000 years, you have to look at the women who managed the transitions. You follow her into her quarters. It's a palace within a palace. It's quiet here. There are no muskets, but there is power. She beckons a messenger, whispers a command, and you realize that while Idris Alooma controls the army, the Mojira controls the dynasty. You might think the king is the undisputed boss, but in Kanem-Bornu, the king's mother is the one who can technically fire him, or at least make his life so miserable that he wishes he was fired. So, put down the musket and the diplomatic treaty. We need to go inside the harem. We need to understand the matriarchy that beats at the heart of this patriarchy. You are stepping through a doorway that very few men in history have ever been allowed to cross. You are entering the fura, the inner private quarters of the royal palace. Now, pause for a second. Get the Hollywood image out of your head. This isn't a scene from Aladdin with belly dancers and guys peeling grapes. This is the command center of the dynasty's most potent fail-safe mechanism. This is the office of the Mojira. You find yourself in a courtyard that feels distinctly different from the king's public audience hall. It's quieter, cooler, smelling of jasmine and frankincense. But the activity here is just as intense. You see messengers sprinting in and out, carrying tablets and scrolls. You see merchants waiting for an audience. They aren't here to see the king, they are here to see his mother. In the Canem-Bornu system, the Mojira, or Queen Mother, is not just a nice old lady who knits socks for the soldiers. She is a parallel sovereign. You watch as she holds court. She sits on a raised dais, perhaps even shielded by a screen similar to the king's. The men bowing to her aren't just household servants. They are military commanders and regional governors. Why? Because the Mojira owns land, lots of it. She has her own fiefs, her own tax revenue, and her own private army. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that often gets buried. For long stretches of the empire's history, the person actually keeping the state from collapsing wasn't the guy on the throne, but the woman behind it. Take the case of Mojira Aissa Kili. You are looking at the woman who practically invented the Iron Lady archetype for these. When Idris Alooma, the hero we just spent 3 sections fawning over, was a child, his father died. In most medieval kingdoms, a child king is a recipe for disaster. It's usually the moment when the uncles swoop in, kill the kid, and take the crown. But they couldn't get past Aissa Kili. You can imagine her in this very courtyard, staring down the ambitious generals and the scheming courtiers. She ruled as regent for years. She was the one who organized the defense against the Balala raids while her son was still learning to walk. She was the one who negotiated the trade deals. She held the door shut against chaos with one hand and raised the greatest king in the empire's history with the other. There is a scholarly debate here that is fascinating. Some historians argue that this immense female power is a survival from the pre-Islamic African matriarchal traditions of the Zaghawa people. They suggest that before Islam arrived, descent might have been traced through women. Others argue it's just pragmatic politics. Who else can you trust, if not your mom? But the power of women in the court isn't limited to the Majira. You walk further into the complex and meet the Gumsu. The Gumsu is the first wife of the Mai. But again, don't think spouse, think chief of staff. In the complex polygamous structure of the palace, where a king might have 4 legal wives and dozens of concubines, the Gumsu runs the show. She manages the domestic economy of the palace, which, given the thousands of people living here, is like running a Fortune 500 company. Here is a quirky, specific detail about the Mageres power that you probably wouldn't survive if you tested it. She controls the food. In a world where poison is the preferred method of resignation for unpopular kings, the control of the royal kitchen is a matter of national security. The Majira often oversees the preparation of the king's meals. It's a literal biological check on power. If the king wants to eat, he has to stay on mom's good side. There are stories in the oral traditions of Magiras who starved their sons into submission when they made bad political decisions. You watch a ceremony where the Magira is officially installed. It's almost as elaborate as the king's coronation. She receives a special staff of office. She is given a new name. She effectively divorces her old life and becomes a state institution. But there is a darker side to this matriarchy. You see the Majira conferring with a group of older women, the Dugoria. These are female guards, tough as nails, who police the women's quarters. They are the enforcers. If a concubine plots against the king, or if a minor prince gets too ambitious, the Dogaria handle it quietly within the walls. No trial, no public execution, just a disappearance. The Majira is also the guardian of the dynasty's secrets. Remember the Mune? Before Dunama opened it, it was often the senior women of the court who knew the rituals to protect it. They are the keepers of the deep state knowledge, the oral histories, the genealogies, the scandals that must never be written down. As you stand in the cool shade of the Majira's veranda, watching her dictate a letter to a governor, you realize that the Kanem-Bornu Empire isn't a pyramid with one man at the top. It's a balance beam. On one side is the Mai, with his guns and his horses. On the other side is the Majira, with her lineage, her lands, and her control over the palace interior. If either side gets too heavy, the whole thing tips over. Idris Alooma was a great king because he respected this balance. He let his mother rule her sphere while he ruled his. But not every king is so smart. You can see the tension in the eyes of the current Gumsu as she watches a young, arrogant prince strut through the courtyard. She knows that one day he will be king, and she is already calculating how to manage him. This dual-gendered power structure gives the empire a resilience that purely patriarchal states lack. When the men are off dying in wars, the women keep the administration running. When the king is incompetent, the queen mother steers the ship from the back seat. But the Majira and the Gumsu are still bound by blood and marriage. They are part of the royal family. They have a vested interest in the dynasty. However, to run an empire this big, you need administrators who have no family. You need men who have no children to inherit their wealth, no wives to distract them, and no loyalty to anyone but the state. You need the third pillar of the empire. You leave the women's quarters and head toward the administrative wing. The men you see here are different. They are often overweight, soft-skinned, and have high fluting voices. They are dressed in the finest silks. They walk with an arrogance that rivals the king himself. These are the eunuchs. And if you think they are just servants holding fans, you are about to be very surprised. You are about to meet the men who actually run the government, the spies who know everything, and the generals who are trusted more than the king's own brothers. You are walking down a corridor that smells of expensive perfume and dangerous secrets. You've left the jasmine-scented courts of the Queen Mother and the sun-baked parade grounds of the army. This is the nerve center of the bureaucracy, and the men running it are perhaps the most misunderstood figures in the entire empire. You are surrounded by the eunuchs of Bornu. Now, pop culture has done a real number on the image of the eunuch. We tend to picture them as whispery, scheming weaklings hiding behind curtains, or as the comic relief in a fantasy novel. But looking at the man blocking your path, weak is the last word that comes to mind. He is massive. We're talking NFL lineman size. Without the testosterone to regulate metabolism, many of these men grew to be physically imposing, heavyset figures. He is dressed in layers of heavy brocade that would make a Venetian merchant weep with envy. He has no beard, his skin is smooth, and his voice, when he speaks, is high and fluting. But do not let the voice fool you. This man can have you executed before you finish your next sentence. You are looking at the solution to the oldest problem in monarchy: nepotism. See, the Saifawa kings had a problem. If you give a high office like treasurer or governor to your brother or your uncle, they might do a good job. But they might also use that money and power to build their own army and overthrow you. Family is dangerous. Family has a claim to the throne. But a eunuch has no family. He has no sons to inherit his wealth. He has no father-in-law to impress. He is, in the brutal logic of the time, biologically dead as far as the dynasty is concerned. He cannot be king. He cannot start a dynasty. His entire existence, his wealth, his status depends 100% on the goodwill of the current Mai. You watch as a eunuch official, the Mai treasurer, inspects a ledger. He is auditing the tax returns from the salt trade. He is ruthless. He doesn't care if the tax collector is a noble from an ancient family. If the numbers don't add up, the Mai will strip him of his rank. The hereditary nobles hate these guys. They look at them with pure venom. To the nobles, the eunuchs are mutilated slaves who have stolen the jobs that should belong to the aristocracy. But to the king, the eunuchs are the ultimate firewall. They are the king's men. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that is often overlooked. In Kanem-Bornu, eunuchs weren't just bookkeepers, they were generals. You heard that right. You walk into a war room and see a eunuch tracing a line on a map. This is the Kaigama, the commander-in-chief of the armies of the south. In many periods of the empire's history, this supreme military rank was held by a Slav eunuch. Imagine the scene: a castrated slave leading thousands of freeborn aristocratic knights into battle. The knights have to obey him, not because of his bloodline, but because the king says so. It is a radical meritocracy built on mutilation. You witness the sheer scale of this administrative class. It's not just a handful of advisors. We are talking about thousands of eunuchs. The demand was so high that Bornu actually became a center for the production of eunuchs-agrim industry, where young boys captured in raids were processed and then trained. It's a horrific reality, and you can feel the trauma in the air. The survival rate for the procedure was low. The men standing here are the survivors. They have paid a flesh tax for their power, and perhaps because of that, they wield that power with a cold, detached efficiency. Here is a quirky, specific detail about their role. They are the gatekeepers of the king's body. You try to get an audience with the Mai, you can't just knock on the door. You have to go through the Saroma, or a similar high-ranking eunuch official. They decide who gets in. They decide which petitions the king sees. In a very real sense, they construct the king's reality. If the eunuchs decide the king shouldn't know about a famine in the north, the king doesn't know. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate. Who was actually in charge? Was the Mai the master and the eunuchs the slaves? Or were the eunuchs the deep state manipulating the king from the shadows? Historians argue that in the later years of the empire, as the kings became more secluded and ritualized, the eunuch bureaucracy became the de facto government. They ran the state while the king sat behind a curtain being divine. You watch a transaction that sums up this paradox. A wealthy merchant is trying to bribe a eunuch to get a trade permit. The eunuch accepts the gift bag of gold dust with a look of utter boredom. He is likely one of the richest men in the city. He owns land, he owns horses, he owns his own slaves, who are not eunuchs. He lives better than most European dukes, yet legally, he is property. If the king wakes up tomorrow and decides to execute him, he has no legal recourse. It's a high-risk, higher-word existence. But their influence isn't just political, it's educational. You see, because they had no families to distract them, many eunuchs dedicated themselves to learning. They became patrons of the arts. They built mosques, they collected libraries. You follow a group of eunuchs leaving the palace. They aren't heading to a brothel or a tavern. They are heading to a madrasa. They are going to discuss Islamic jurisprudence with the scholars. This connects the brutal physical administration of the state to its intellectual soul. The eunuchs manage the body of the empire, the taxis, the armies, the gates, but they also fund the mind. As you walk through the palace gates, leaving the heavy perfume of the eunuch's quarters behind, you hear the sound of chanting. It's not the rhythmic chanting of the soldiers, nor the prizing of the court poets. It is the steady, melodic recitation of the Quran. The Saifawa dynasty has built a fortress of earth, a military of iron, and a bureaucracy of flesh. But to be a true caliphate, to claim leadership over the faithful, they need more than power. They need legitimacy. They need to prove that they are the guardians of knowledge. You are about to enter the golden age of Bornu scholarship. You are going to meet the men who put this city on the intellectual map of the world, men who corresponded with Cairo, Baghdad, and Istanbul as equals. The eunuchs hold the keys, but the scholars hold the pen. And, as the old saying goes, the ink of the scholar is holier than the blood of the martyr. Let's go see what they are writing. You step out of the palace complex, and the noise of the administration fades, replaced by a low, buzzing hum that sounds like a massive hive of bees. But as you get closer to the shaded courtyards of the city's central district, you realize it's human voices. Thousands of them, you have entered the intellectual heart of the empire. You are in the district of the ulama, the scholars. If the cavalry provided the muscle and the eunuchs provided the nervous system, these guys are the brain, and frankly, they have a bit of a chip on their shoulder. You see, when people talk about medieval African scholarship, they always talk about Timbuktu. Timbuktu gets all the press, all the documentaries, and all the glory of Africa tissue. But here in Burni and Gazargamu, the scholars would tell you that Timbuktu is just a flashy tourist trap. They would argue that the real serious work is being done right here. In the dust of Bornu, you watch a circle of students sitting on the ground around a teacher, a malam. He isn't reading from a book, he is reciting from memory, eyes closed, rocking slightly to the rhythm of the text. The students are writing on wooden slates called aloe, using reed pens dipped in thick, black ink. This brings us to a quirky, visceral detail that you definitely won't see in a modern university. Watch what happens when a student memorizes a verse perfectly. He doesn't just erase the slate. He washes the ink off with water, catching the dark liquid in a bowl, and then ... he drinks it. To you, this might look like a health code violation. But here, the Word of God is not just information. It is a physical substance. It is baraka blessing. By drinking the wash water, the student is literally internalizing the knowledge, making the sacred text part of his flesh and blood. It's the ultimate download. But don't let the mysticism fool you. The academic standards here are rigorous. You are looking at a legal education system that rivals anything in Bologna or Oxford at the same time. These scholars are experts in the Maliki School of Islamic Law. They are studying grammar, logic, astronomy, and algebra, and they aren't isolated. This is the coolest part. You see a scholar reading a letter that just arrived with the salt caravan. It's from a colleague in Cairo. Here is a mainstream historical fact that proves Bornu was a global player. In the great Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the Harvard of the medieval Islamic world, there was a specific dormitory reserved exclusively for students from Kanem-Bornu. It was called the Ribwak al-Borno. Think about that. The Safwa kings sent so much gold and so many students to Egypt that they bought their own dorm. A kid from the savannah could walk to Cairo, knock on the door, and find a community of Kanuri speakers, funded by a scholarship endowment set up by his king back home. It was a study abroad program that lasted for centuries. This connection gave the Bornu scholars a cosmopolitan swagger. They considered themselves part of the global elite. You see them debating complex points of inheritance law that would bore a normal person to tears. But to them, it's a spectator sport. They correspond with judges in Baghdad. They critique the fatwas of scholars in Morocco. However, this power leads to a fascinating scholarly debate. Were these scholars independent voices of truth, or were they just propagandists for the state? You look at the most famous scholar of the era, the Grand Imam Ahmad ibn Fartua. He is the man who wrote the Chronicles of Idris Alooma. He's the reason we know about the giraffes and the muskets. But reading his work, you realize he lays it on pretty thick. He compares Alooma to the legendary heroes of the past. Is he a historian, or is he a press secretary? Some modern historians argue that the ulama were totally captured by the state. They point to the Merim's letters of privilege. These were charters granted by the king that exempted certain scholarly families from taxes for generations. You can imagine the deal. You write nice things about how holy I am, and your family never pays taxes again. It's a tempting offer. You see families clutching these Merims like winning lottery tickets. It created a hereditary class of intellectuals who were deeply invested in the survival of the dynasty. But you also see moments of spine. You watch a Malam refuse to bow to a powerful governor, citing a verse from the Quran about the arrogance of power. The king tolerates this dissent because he needs their legitimacy. He can rule as the commander of the faithful, if the faithful are calling him a tyrant. The libraries here are hidden treasures. You won't find massive public halls with Dewey Decimal Systems. The books are kept in the private homes of the scholars, wrapped in leather, stored in wooden chests to protect them from termites and sandstorms. You watch a scholar carefully unwrapping a manuscript. It's a copy of a dictionary from Syria, but in the margins. He has written notes in Kanuri and Arabic, translating the concepts for his local students. This is the intellectual engine of the empire. It turns the raw power of the military into a civilized society. It creates a system of law that allows trade to flourish. A merchant from Tripoli knows that if he gets cheated in the market of Berni Engizargamu, he can go to a Qadi judge and get a fair hearing based on written laws, not just the whim of a chief, but books are fragile things. Paper burns, termites eat, and ideas are dangerous. As the sun climbs higher, the heat in the courtyard becomes oppressive. The scholars retreat into the cool mud brick interiors. You realize that this entire intellectual edifice rests on a very physical foundation: safety. A scholar can't study if he's worried about being kidnapped. A book can't travel from Cairo if the caravan gets raided. The golden age of the mind is entirely dependent on the iron age of the military. The king knows this. He knows that to keep the ink flowing, the trade routes to the north must be ironclad. The connection to Cairo and Tripoli is the umbilical cord of this civilization. You step out of the quiet school and look north again. The road to Fez is a gateway to the Mediterranean's calling. It's time to leave the books and go back to the border. The empire has a corridor to protect, and there are predators waiting in the dunes who don't care about algebra or theology. They only care about loot. You leave the hushed, ink-stained tranquility of the Scholars' Quarter and ride north. The baobabs and the green scrub of the savannah fade behind you, replaced once again by the relentless, blinding white of the deep desert. You are entering the Fezzan corridor. If the capital is the brain and the army is the muscle, this strip of sand is the jugular vein. Cut it, and the empire bleeds out in weeks. You are joining a patrol on the most vital infrastructure project in the history of the Central Sahel. But don't look for paved roads or suspension bridges. This highway is made of wind, sand, and invisible lines drawn on a map that exists only in the heads of the guides. This is the direct line connecting the tropical heart of Africa to the Mediterranean coast of modern-day Libya. For centuries, this was the Bornu Road. While other trans-Saharan routes shifted east or west, depending on who was fighting whom, the Bornu Road remained the gold standard of reliability. Why? Because the Saifowa kings were obsessed with it. You ride alongside a unit of light cavalry. These aren't the heavy quilted leafety tanks we saw earlier. Those poor horses would die of heat stroke out here in 20 minutes. These are lean men on lean horses, or more often, on fast-racing camels. They are the highway patrol of the 17th century. Their job is terrifyingly simple: keep the water wet and the bandits dead. You stop at a well in the Kowar Oasis chain. This is the pit stop formula that makes the whole system work. You look down into the dark water. It's deep. Digging this well took a monumental effort, and keeping it clear of sand requires constant maintenance. You watch the soldiers inspecting the bucket ropes and checking the surrounding dunes for tracks. Here is a quirky, gritty detail of desert warfare. The most dangerous weapon out here is a musket, or a spear. It's a dead camel. Raiders, specifically the Tubu and Tuareg nomads who lurk in the rocky Massifes, know that they can beat the Bornu army in a pitched battle. So they fight dirty. If they want to close the road, they don't build a barricade. They kill a camel and dump the rotting carcass into the well. It poisons the water supply for months. You watch the patrol commander tasting the water, his face tense. It's clean. He signals, all clear. The caravan behind you carrying ivory, ostrich feathers, and slaves proceed. This constant vigilance brings us to a major diplomatic reality. The Saifowa kings knew they couldn't patrol every inch of a 1,000-mile desert. So, they played politics. You are heading toward the region of Fezzan in southern Libya. The rulers there are the masters of the northern terminus. The relationship between Bornu and Fezzan is complicated. It's like a bad marriage that neither side can afford to leave. Sometimes, the Mai of Bornu claims to be the overlord of Fezzan. You see letters where he refers to the Sultan of Fezzan as his deputy. There are periods where Bornu armies actually marched all the way up here to install a friendly puppet ruler. But most of the time, it's a transactional friendship. The Mai sends, gifts gold eunuchs. Giraffe Sand, the Sultan of Fezzan, promises not to let his people rob the Bornu caravans. This brings up a spicy scholarly debate. How big was the Kanem-Bornu Empire, really? If you look at a map in a history book, you'll often see a massive blob of color stretching from Lake Chad all the way to Libya. But some historians argue this is misleading. They say Bornu wasn't a territorial empire in the modern sense. They didn't own the land in between. They owned the network. They controlled the points, the wells, the oases, the markets. The space between those points was still the Wild West. It's a network empire, not a land empire. The king didn't care if he ruled the empty sand dunes. He just cared that his goods could move through them safely. You witness a toll booth encounter that illustrates this perfectly. The patrol spots a group of Tubu nomads on a ridge. They are armed. In a different century, this would be a shootout. But today, the patrol leader rides out with a bag of salt. He tosses it to the nomad leader. They exchange a few words. The nomads vanish. Is it bribery? Is it tax? Is it protection? Money? It's all of the above. The empire is renting peace mile by mile, but the stakes are incredibly high. You watch a caravan coming south down the corridor. They are carrying the lifeblood of the Mai's power, horses and metal. We talked about the horses earlier, but it bears repeating. The empire consumes horses like a furnace consumes coal. The local climate kills them, so they constantly need fresh imports from North Africa. If this road closes, the cavalry stops moving. If the cavalry stops moving, the empire collapses. It's a fragile feedback loop, hanging by a thread of diplomacy and well water. And let's not forget the darker cargo. You see a group of captives being marched north. They are destined for the slave markets of Tripoli and Istanbul. This is the grim currency that pays for the horses. The Fezzan corridor is a conveyor belt of human misery moving north and military technology moving south. It's a harsh utilitarian exchange that underpins the entire Golden Age. As night falls, the temperature plummets. You huddle by a fire made of dried camel dung, only fuel available. The stars are incredibly bright, an indifferent canopy over a landscape that has swallowed entire armies without burping. You listen to the soldiers talking. They are telling stories about the jinn of the desert, the spirits that lure travelers off the path. They are superstitious, and rightly so. Out here, a sandstorm can bury you alive in 20 minutes. A mistake in navigation kills everyone. The patrol leader checks his astrolabe. Yes, the Bornu elite were that sophisticated. They used navigation tools imported from the Arab world to guide their fleets of camels across the sea of sand. They treated the desert exactly like an ocean. This corridor allowed Bornu to bypass its rivals. To the west, the Songhai Empire crumbled because they lost control of their trade routes and got invaded by Morocco. Bornu survived because they kept the Fezzan road open. They kept the line to the Ottomans clear. They insulated themselves from the chaos of West Africa by looking north. But keeping this road open costs money, a lot of money. You can't pay these soldiers with good vibes. You can't bribe the Tubu chiefs with poetry. You need cash. But here's the problem. The empire doesn't have a mint. They don't stamp gold coins with the king's face on them. So how do you pay for a continental superhighway? You use shells and you use cloth. As the sun rises, painting the dunes in violent shades of orange and pink, you turn your mount south again. We need to go back to the markets. We need to understand the bizarre, brilliant, and slightly fragile economic system that funded all this. Get ready to count cowries, millions of them, and try not to think about inflation. Because when your money is a seashell that anyone can pick up on a beach in the Maldives, monetary policy gets very interesting. You step off your camel and into a wall of sound that hits you harder than the desert heat. You are back in the grand market of Berni Engaz Argamu. After the silence of the Fezzan corridor, this place feels like a riot. It's a sensory overload of shouting merchants, bleeding goats, and the smell of roasting meat mixed with unwashed bodies. But look down at your hand. You aren't holding gold coins. You aren't holding silver. You are holding a handful of small, white, glossy sea snails. Welcome to the Cavalry economy. You are about to learn a very hard lesson in medieval finance. Money is whatever people say it is. In the Kanem-Bornu Empire, for nearly 1,000 years, the official currency was the shell of the Cypria moneta, a mollusk found almost exclusively in the warm waters of the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. Just think about the journey that little shell in your hand took. It was harvested by a diver in the Maldives, shipped to India, sold to Arab merchants, carried by ship to the Red Sea, or the Mediterranean hauled by camel, across the Sahara, and finally dumped here in the heart of Africa to pay for your lunch. It is the original global currency. You walk up to a food stall. You want a skewer of grilled spicy meat, the ancestor of modern suya. The vendor doesn't ask for a coin. He asks for 40 shells. Now, here is the quirky, annoying reality of using shells as cash. You have to count them. You watch a transaction taking place next to you involving a larger purchase, maybe a goat. It is agonizingly slow. The buyer and the seller are sitting on the ground, counting shells into piles of 5, then grouping those into piles of 20, then piles of 100. It's not just a purchase, it's a math class. To speed things up, locals use specialized baskets or mats with indentations that hold exactly a certain number of shells. It's the medieval equivalent of a coin-counting machine, but powered by patience. But what if you want to buy something expensive, say a sword or a horse? You can't carry a dump truck full of seashells. That's where the second tier of the economy comes in. You see a man walking through the crowd with a bolt of white cotton cloth draped over his shoulder. He isn't a tailor, he is a walking wallet. This is gabaga. It is the dollar bill of the Central Sudan. Gabaga consists of strips of cotton cloth, woven to a standardized width, usually about the width of a hand and a specific length. This is commodity money. It has intrinsic value because, unlike a paper dollar or a seashell, you can technically sew it into a shirt if the economy crashes. You watch the exchange rates fluctuate in real time. A merchant shouts that the price of gabaga has dropped because a new caravan just arrived from the weaving towns of the Hausa states. Suddenly, everyone is frantically trading their cloth for shells or vice versa. It's a forex trading floor, but with textiles. But there is a massive economic headache lurking in this system, and you can feel the anxiety it creates. It's called inflation. Since the government doesn't mint the money, they can't control the supply. If a massive shipment of cowries arrives from Cairo, the value of the shell in your hand plummets. You might wake up in the morning and find that the chicken that cost 40 shells yesterday now costs 80? Just because a caravan master had a good trip. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate. Why didn't the Safawa kings mint coins? They had gold. They had access to silver through trade. They knew what coins were. You see the Maria Theresa Toller's massive Austrian silver coins being used by the international wholesalers in the corner of the market. But for daily life, the kings stuck to shells and cloth. Some historians argue this was a deliberate strategy of isolation. By using a currency that was worthless in Europe or the Middle East, you can't buy anything in London with a cowrie shell. They prevented capital flight. The wealth stayed inside the regional system. It forced merchants to buy local goods to get their value out. It was a walled garden economy. Others argue it was a trap. They say that relying on imported shells made the empire vulnerable to external manipulation. If the Europeans or Ottomans wanted to crash the Bornu economy, they could just dump cheap shells into the market and watch the chaos ensue. You wander into the high-end district. Here, the rules change again. You see the heavy hitters, the Meyer treasurer we met earlier, or the agents of the Queen Mother. They aren't counting shells, they are weighing gold dust. The mythkal is the unit here. It's a weight of gold, roughly 4.25 grams. This is the currency of diplomacy and war. When the Mai buys muskets from Tripoli, he pays in gold or slaves. He doesn't send 1,000,000 seashells. You watch a goldsmith carefully weighing dust on a tiny brass scale. He uses red seeds called rattle as counterweights. The precision is intense. A sneeze here could cost you a month's wages. But the most interesting part of this market isn't the buying, it's the credit. You see a merchant handing over a massive shipment of leather goods to a caravan leader without getting a single shell in return. They exchange a piece of paper, letter of credit. Thanks to the Islamic legal framework and the literacy of the scholars we met, the empire runs on trust. A merchant in Burni and Gazargamu can write a check that can be cashed in Tripoli. It's a sophisticated financial instrument that predates Western banking systems by centuries. However, as you haggle for a new pair of sandals, yours are destroyed from the salt march. You notice a shadow falling over the market. Not a cloud, but a mood. The prices of imported goods are ticking up. The caravan from the north was late this month. Rumors are swirling that the road near the Air Mountains is blocked. The cowries are flowing, the cotton is weaving, but the safety that underpins it all is fracturing. The Tuareg, those veiled lords of the desert, whom Idris Alooma managed to bribe and bully into submission, are getting hungry again. They see the wealth piling up in this market, the mountains of grain, the stacks of ivory, the bags of shellsand. They are remembering that it's easier to steal than to herd goats. You leave the market with your pockets jingling, or rather clicking with shells. You've seen the economic engine that keeps the knights in armor and the scholars in books. It's a system of beautiful complexity, running on snail shells and cotton strips. But an economy is a soft target. It relies on peace. And up north, in the rocky hideouts of the Sahara, the peace is fraying. The blue men are mounting their camels. They aren't coming to trade this time. They are coming to remind the empire that in the desert, the only currency that truly matters is steel. You better spend those shells while you can. The Tuareg nuisance is about to become the Tuareg nightmare. You are no longer in the comfortable currency-counting chaos of the marketplace. You are back on patrol, this time in the scrubland that separates the Bornu heartland from the deep Sahara. The air is tense, and the silence is broken only by the snorting of your mount and the incessant metallic clinking of your quilted armor. Suddenly, a cry rings out. The Kanuri scouts point to the horizon. A line of dust is rising, moving fast. Here they come. The Tuareg, you are about to engage with the blue men of the desert, the eternal irritant, the high-speed dental drill of the Canem-Bornu Empire. These aren't organized armies in the style of Idris Alooma's state. These are loose confederations of warrior pastorists who believe that anything left unguarded in the desert is rightfully theirs. You watch them approach. They ride with an effortless, almost arrogant grace. Their camels are fast and lean, and they are completely covered in indigo cloth. This brings us to a fascinating, quirky detail about the Tuareg. You look at the warriors and notice that every single man is wearing a veil, the tagolmust, which covers his face entirely, leaving only his eyes exposed. Now, in most Islamic societies, women wear the veil, and men do not. Here, the opposite is true. The women are unveiled, running the household and the camps. The men are veiled, guarding their honor and their identity from the world. And since the indigo dye from their veils rubs off onto their skin with every gust of wind and bead of sweat, they acquire a bluish-black tint, earning them the nickname, the Blue Men. They are literally painted by the desert. Your cavalry unit charges. The ground trembles beneath the hooves of the heavy, quilted, leafety knights. It's supposed to be terrifying. It's supposed to break their morale, and it works for about 3 minutes. You watch the Tuareg effortlessly dissolve. They don't stand and fight, they ride into the dense scrub, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Their light camels can hop over the rough ground that would break the ankle of a heavy barb horse. The Kanuri knights, encased in their massive cotton armor, are too slow, too heavy, and too hot to catch them. It's like trying to catch a mosquito with a steamroller. This is not a war of conquest. It is a war of attrition. The Tuareg are here to cut the jugular vein of the empire, to steal the camels, to capture the slaves marching north, and to generally make life expensive for the Mai. This constant drain on resources is why historians refer to the Tuareg as the nuisance. The empire is strong enough to beat them in any pitched battle, but too big to defend every well and every camel trail simultaneously. You join a pursuit that lasts for hours. It's pointless. The Tuareg run their camels until the heavy Bornu horses are exhausted, and then they vanish into the dunes, often returning the next day to steal the exhausted horses. Idris Alooma and his successors had to develop a sophisticated approach to managing this problem, a combination of military patrols and essentially bribery. You see a Kanuri officer meeting with a Tuareg chieftain under a flag of truce. They aren't discussing peace. They are discussing the price of peace. The scholarly debate that always surrounds this conflict is this: were the Tuareg external raiders trying to destroy the Bornu Empire? Or were they simply a powerful group of business partners who were violently negotiating their percentage of the trans-Saharan protection money? Many historians argue that the Tuareg were essential to the trade. They knew the routes better than anyone. They provided the guides. So, the Safwa kings weren't just fighting bandits, they were paying a rival security firm. The raids, therefore, were less about destruction and more about leverage away for the Tuareg to demand a higher fee for letting the caravans pass. It was high-stakes haggling where the currency was blood and salt. You participate in the boring, essential work of patrolling the territory. You are constantly building small earthen watchtowers and restocking wells. It is a war of logistics. Every time the Mai dedicates 3,000 soldiers to patrol the north, that's 3,000 soldiers who are expanding the empire or putting down a rebellion somewhere else. The cost of this constant defense is immense. It consumes the tax revenue from the salt and the profits from the gabaga cloth. You spend weeks in this arid, endless cycle of alarm and exhaustion. The air is dry. The heat is constant. You look up at the vast empty sky and feel the weight of this empire's obsession with the north. The Safwa dynasty, having secured its connection to the Mediterranean guns, horses, books, is psychologically tethered to that direction. They see every threat as coming from the Sahara or the Balala to the east. The whole military machine is aimed at preserving this trade corridor. But as you ride westward during a brief reconnaissance, you catch a glimpse of smoke on the distant horizon far to the west, near the House Estates. It's not the smoke of a usual skirmish or a village cooking fire. It's thicker, blacker, and it is moving. You ask your commander about it, he shrugs. Just the Fulani, he says dismissively. Some religious fanatics causing trouble. They are dismissing what you are seeing as a local annoyance. They are so focused on the old enemy, the Tuareg, who robbed the caravan, that they are ignoring the new enemy, the one who wants to destroy the caravan master, the customs, and the whole system. The Mai of Bornu is the commander of the faithful. He has the scholars, the Sharia courts, and the great mosques. But to the west, a movement is stirring that believes the Safwa kings are hypocrites. They believe the kings are engaging in idolatry by mixing animist traditions with Islam. They believe the kings are corrupt, taxing the poor while dressing their cavalry in diamond-encrusted cotton armor. You are watching the beginning of the great Fulani Jihad. It's an ideological war, and Idris Alooma's heirs, focused entirely on the economics of the north, are completely unprepared for it. The Empire of Bornu is about to face an existential threat, a spiritual earthquake that will crack its foundation and finally achieve what the Balala and the Tuareg never could. You look at the smoke in the west. It doesn't smell like burning villages. It smells like religious fervor, and that, you realize, is far more dangerous than any musket or quilted armor. The smoke you saw on the western horizon is no longer a distant annoyance. It is a rising tide of ash and fire, and it is now washing over the western provinces of the empire. The distant sound of drumming is replaced by a sound that is far more terrifying, the high-pitched, fervent chanting of thousands of men marching on foot. You feel the ground shake, not with the organized thunder of the Mai's heavy cavalry, but with the chaotic, relentless energy of a social and spiritual revolution. You are witnessing the wave of the Fulani Jihad, and it is coming for the foundations of the Kanem-Bornu Empire. The enemy is entirely different from anything the Safwa dynasty has faced before. They are the Fulani or Fube. They are primarily nomadic pastoralists who have spread across West Africa for centuries, and they are now uniting under the banner of Usman Dan Fodio, a scholar and charismatic reformer known as the Shehu. Their threat is not about territory, it is about ideology. You stand with a Bornu commander on the border. He looks worried, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. He dismisses the Fulani as heretics and cowherders, but you know the truth. The Fulani are not interested in stealing salt or cows. They are interested in stealing the soul of the empire. The central argument of the jihad is that the Mai's government is unjust and hypocritical. They accuse the Safwa rulers of mixing pure Islam with pagan practices, the same immune problem that Mai Dunama created centuries ago, but now weaponized with a mass movement. They point to the exorbitant taxes, the Mai levies on the poor cattle herders. They denounce the opulence of the court and the lax moral standards of the urban elite. The Mai may be the commander of the faithful, but the Fulani argue he is a corrupt apostate who must be removed. The movement gains astonishing speed. You watch the dominoes fall. The House of City-States, the neighbors of Bornu, are crumbling under the weight of this spiritual assault. The Fulani, armed with religious zeal and the promise of a purer society, quickly overthrow the traditional Hausa kings, replacing them with a vast new state, the Sokoto Caliphate. This brings us to a crucial mainstream historical fact. The Fulani Jihad, which began in 1804, was an existential catastrophe for Bornu. It led to the conquest of Bornu's vital western provinces and the effective destruction of the dynasty's military prestige. The Fulani took control of the western half of the empire's territory, including key trade routes and fertile lands, shrinking Bornu's size by half overnight. The military response of the Bornu court is tragically slow and arrogant. The Mai Dunama I, or Mai Dunama II, sends his heavy cavalry out. But the Fulani are light, fast, and most importantly, fighting for God. They use guerrilla tactics, the heavy Lifidi knights, those quilted tanks that crushed the Sao and intimidated the Tuareg, are useless against a scattered enemy that disappears into the bush only to strike the supply lines. They are too slow, too hot, and too committed to the old ways of warfare. You see a group of Fulani warriors charging into battle, not with the disciplined ranks of the Kanuri, but in small, frantic groups. They aren't afraid of dying because they believe they are guaranteed paradise. And here is a quirky, specific detail that gave the Fulani immense psychological power. They carried flags. Usman Dan Fodio delegated the authority for the jihad to his lieutenants by presenting them with a flag banda. These were not just military standards, they were religious seals of office. The sight of these banners advancing terrified the Hausa and Kanuri forces because it was a visual confirmation that the Fulani leaders had the explicit personal blessing of the Shehu. It turned a simple general into a divinely ordained avenger. This conflict also highlights a deep scholarly debate. Was this simply a holy war aimed at religious purification, or was it a deeper social revolution fueled by economic resentment? Many historians point out that the Fulani were pastoralists who felt marginalized by the settled urban and agricultural elites of the Hausa and Bornu states. They were constantly fighting the MIS tax collectors. The jihad was, therefore, not just about theology. It was about the poor, nomadic cattle herders rising up against the rich, settled city dwellers. The religious fervor provided the justification, but the economic and class divisions provided the kindling. You watch the Mai's advisors panic. They realize they are losing not just land, but the narrative. The Fulani are out-Islaming the commander of the faithful. They realize they're centralized. Taxivi state looks decadent and corrupt when placed next to the austere, zealous movement of the Shehu Mai Ahmad I, facing the greatest military crisis in centuries, makes a series of disastrous decisions. He relies on his old, incompetent generals. He refuses to decentralize power. He maintains the pretense of divinity while his provinces burn. The Saifoa dynasty, which survived 800 years of internal squabbles and external bandits, is on the verge of total collapse because it cannot comprehend an idea as an enemy. The Mai's government, in a last desperate move, finally realizes they need help. They need a general who understands the new style of warfare, who is as devoted to Islam as the Fulani are, and who can command respect without relying on the dynasty's now failing prestige. There is one man who fits the bill, a scholar, a poet, and a military genius who has been quietly teaching and observing the conflict from the periphery. His name is Muhammad Al-Amin Al-Kanemi. The Mai, in his arrogance, doesn't want to ask him for help. But as the smoke of the burning western provinces drifts over Burni and Gazargamu, forcing the court to cough, the Mai realizes he has no choice. You are watching the Saifoa dynasty, the longest-reigning royal house in Africa, sign its own death warrant, not with a treaty, but with a desperate plea for rescue. Because the man who is about to save the empire will also be the man who ends the dynasty. The air in the capital of Burni and Gazargamu is thick with defeat. The Mai, the descendant of the Yemeni hero, is watching his ancient kingdom crumble, province by province. The Fulani, those zealous cowherders, have just captured the capital itself, forcing the court to temporarily flee. The dynasty that survived 1,000 years of skirmishes has met its match in an ideological firestorm. The Mai, humbled and terrified, sends the most desperate plea imaginable to the scholar he had once viewed with suspicion. You watch as Muhammad Al-Amin Al-Kanemi rides into the war-torn remnants of the city. He is not a prince. He is not a general with a long lineage. He is an imam, a teacher, a man whose power comes from his pen and his piety. He is the ultimate anti-establishment hero. Al-Kanemi is the perfect counter-narrative to the Fulani jihad. He, too, is a scholar who calls for religious purity and justice. But unlike the Fulani, he doesn't call for the destruction of the Saifawa state. He calls for its reform. He argues that the Mai's government is salvageable, and that the Fulani are extremists whose violence is unlawful. He is here not to inherit the throne, but to rescue the concept of the state itself, and he is brilliant. You watch him immediately implement a complete reversal of the Safawas' old military strategy. He dismisses the slow, heavy, cotton-clad Lifidi knights. He realizes that the battlefield has become faster and lighter. He mobilizes the Kanem-Bornu warriors and the Shua Arabs fast, unarmored horsemen and foot soldiers who are masters of the spear and shield. He gives them the one thing the Mai never could: effective leadership. You ride with Al-Kanemi on his counteroffensive. It is a terrifying display of competence. The Fulani, confident after years of easy victories, suddenly find themselves facing an enemy who moves as fast as they do, fights as hard as they do, and possesses a superior command structure. Al-Kanemi uses clever tactics-feigned retreats, ambushes, and, most importantly, he secures the morale of his troops by treating them with respect and ensuring they are paid. You are witnessing a mainstream historical fact in action. Al-Kanemi not only halted the Fulani advance, but pushed them back, recapturing Birni Engazargamu and key strategic towns. He saved the Kanem-Bornu state from total dissolution, a feat the Saifawa themselves could not achieve. The moment of rescue is the moment of political doom for the dynasty. When Al-Kanemi returns to the capital, the Mai's power is revealed to be a complete sham. The Saifawa still sit on the throne, but they are terrified marionettes. The real ruler is the man they summoned for help. Here is a quirky political detail about the power transfer. Al-Kanemi refuses to take the title of Mai instead. He takes the title of Shehu, meaning sheikh or religious leader. He rules the state from a new capital, Kukawa, which he founded, while the Mai lives in Birni Engazargamu. It's the ultimate polite coup. The Mai has the crown and the ceremonial robes, but Al-Kanemi has the army, the treasury, and the brains. The dynasty still exists, a ghost of its former self, providing the illusion of continuity. But the power has passed to a new non-dynastic family. The Saifawa dynasty is officially over, having transitioned into the Al-Kanemi dynasty without a single drop of royal blood being shed for the throne itself. You walk between the two capitals. Kukawa Al-Kanemi city is clean, ordered, and efficient. Birni Engazargamu is decaying, quiet, and filled with the shadows of the past. The difference is stark: the living state versus the historical relic. This leads us to a passionate scholarly debate. Was Al-Kanemi a selfless patriot or a cynical opportunist? Some historians argue he was the true savior, a man forced by circumstance to assume power to protect his people, and his refusal of the royal title proves his piety. Others argue that he was simply playing the long game, cleverly using the Fulani crisis to install himself as the strongman. Knowing the exhausted Mai would have no choice but to comply, after all, the dynasty of his own descendants, the Shahas, will openly rule Bornu for the next century. Regardless of his motive, the result is clear. The Saifawa reign of nearly 1,000 years, the longest dynasty in African history, died not with a bang, but with a whimper of thanks to a scholar who saved their skin and stole their state. The empire limps on under Al-Kanemi's leadership, severely reduced in size, but religiously purified and militarily revitalized. It survives the Fulani jihad, but the damage is done. The empire is smaller, poorer, and exposed to a new, terrifying threat brewing in the east. The 19th century is drawing to a close. The great game of history is no longer being played by desert kings, scholars, and sultans. Now, the players wear khaki and carry repeating rifles. You look to the east. A final, terrifying warlord is approaching, a man who understands gunpowder better than the Turks, and brutality better than any Mai. And behind him, you see the massive, greedy shadows of the European colonial powers finally closing in on the only African empire that ever held out this long. The story is about to end, and it will end fast. You are standing in the clean, wide streets of Kukawa, the new capital founded by the Al-Kanemi Shahas. It's the late 19th century. The empire is smaller, less grand, and more practical. but it has survived everything thrown at it: the Balala, the Tuareg, the great Fulani Jihad. It is the last great independent bastion in the central Sudan. But the world has changed again. The threats no longer come from the desert on slow-moving camels. They come from the coast, powered by steam and ideology. You look east and see the last great warlord of independent Africa approaching. His name is Rabi Azubair. Rabi is the Mai's ultimate nightmare, a distillation of every threat they ever faced, but upgraded to industrial standards. He is a Sudanese slaver and military adventurer who has armed his army with the best weapons available: repeating rifles, breech-loading cannons, and a disciplined force trained in modern volley fire. He doesn't have the theological subtlety of the Fulani, nor the dynastic restraints of the Balala. He is simply a machine of conquest, and he is coming for Bornu's wealth. You watch the Sheku's army mobilize for the final confrontation. They ride out in a magnificent spectacle, the famous Kanuri cavalry, still clad in their quilted cotton leafy armor, their spears gleaming, their flags flying proudly. It looks like a medieval parade. Then Rabi's army opens fire. The sound is not the familiar, terrifying crack of the matchlock musket we heard under Idris Alooma. This is a continuous, rapid tat-tat, the sound of repeating rifles. It's instantaneous, systematic slaughter. The quilted armor that stopped arrows for centuries is useless against a modern lead bullet. The cavalry charges. The tactic that held this empire together for 1,000 years are simply erased from existence. The horses fall, taking their armored riders with them, turning the pride of Bornu into a giant, expensive speed bump. You witness a mainstream historical fact that rings the final bell. In 1893, Rabi Azubair captured and sacked Kukawa. He killed the reigning Shehu and proclaimed himself the master of Bornu, the longest-running continuous state in African history, founded 1,000 years ago at the shores of Lake Chad. Falls not to a rival king, but to an uninvited mercenary. Rabi's victory is the ultimate symbolic moment. He is the transitional figure, the man who used European tools to destroy the last independent African kingdom before the Europeans themselves arrived. And arrive they do. You look around, and now you see white men in khaki uniforms. The French from the west, the British from the north, and the Germans from the south. They are looking at Rabi with annoyed irritation. They didn't cross the desert for this place to be ruled by some upstart Sudanese warlord. This leads to a quirky final detail. For a brief time, Rabi Azubair became a de facto ruler that the Europeans had to acknowledge. The French, British, and Germans had already drawn lines on a map in European capitals, dividing up the Bornu territory among themselves. But those lines were theoretical. They had to send real armies to enforce them. The great final act of the empire's story is a scholarly debate about agency. Was Rabi the final destroyer, or the last true champion of African independence, briefly holding off the inevitable European partition? The debate is settled by a single French cannon shot. In 1900, the French defeated and killed Rabi. The colonial cleanup begins immediately. You watch as the French, British, and German commissioners meet at a dusty border post. They don't look at the geography. They don't look at the people. They pull out treaties signed years ago in Berlin, and they carve up the empire with rulers and pens. The heartland of Bornu is divided between the British Nigeria, the Germans Cameroon, and the French Chad and Niger. The unified political identity that had held for 1,000 years is dissolved in ink, its fate decided by men who had never felt the heat of the Sahel sun or heard the clinking of a cowrie shell. You stand on the barren ground where Kukawa once stood. The walls are crumbling, the libraries are scattered. The long, glorious reign of the Cavalry Empire is over. The last of the Saifawa claimants is reduced to a colonial puppet, and soon, even that title will vanish. The final 1,000-year loud story is done. The dust is finally settling. The echoes of the muskets fade away into the dry air. You are no longer watching an army or a king, but simply the passage of time over the vast, indifferent savanna. Allow yourself to feel the weight of this extraordinary duration. 1,000 unbroken years. The sheer audacious endurance of a people who took a hostile landscape, built a massive cavalry force with foreign horses, paid for it with imported seashells, and protected it with quilted cotton armor. They were sophisticated, brutal, and brilliantly adapted to survive. Take a deep, slow breath, letting the final image of the earthen walls and the endless horizons become soft, almost blurred. there is a deep, profound calm in the realization that even the greatest empires are eventually reclaimed by the wind and the sand. Rest now. The journey is over. Let the stillness of the desert settle over you and find a sense of quiet peace in the silence of history.